Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Jason Webster with eGroup, and welcome to our Microsoft Virtual Roadshow Day 1 event, where we're going to be talking about modern workplace solutions. Thank you for joining today. We have three speakers lined up, two of them excellent, one of them is me. So I'll go ahead and walk through some introductions, and then we'll talk about the agenda for today's event, and then a little bit about eGroup, and then we'll dive right into the presentations. Really appreciate your time, and looking forward to an awesome event. So our first speaker today will be Matt Renketto. He's a senior solutions architect for eGroup. Matt comes from an extensive background as an IT director for a global organization, having deployed many of these solutions, both in that organization as well as helping others over the last several years at eGroup do just that and share that success. So looking forward to talking with Matt and talking about his experience both in how to get things done right, but also, what's possible from the modern workplace solutions. Next up will be Jesus Shelby. Jesus Shelby is our Director of Cloud Services, someone who I've personally worked with for the last 8 years. And around eGroup, we call him Mr. Microsoft because he knows a lot about Microsoft. He knows a lot about the technologies, but also comes from a security background as well as the Air Force. And is a wealth of knowledge in how to secure IT solutions, both in the data center and outside, as well as all the technology that we'll be talking to. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from Jesus about, identity and access management, security overall, how to manage devices, particularly when everybody's remote as we are today. And then I'll come up towards the end and talk about some success stories. I think it's important that we have not only during this presentation some things about what's possible, but a little bit taste of how we do it. We have 3 hours, so we're going to be brief and slightly high level, but go deep in a few subjects. But then I'll talk a little bit about where others have done this and the success that they've had across different solutions and what they've been able to achieve. So with that, let's talk about today's goal. It's all about sharing how Microsoft 365, meaning Office 365, Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, as well as Windows 10, delivers an extraordinary experience to your end users, whether they're in their office or they're working remotely from home. So how are we going to get there? We'll do this welcome and introduction. I'll spend a few minutes telling a little bit about us and what we do, as well as a little bit about our speakers. And then Matt's going to come up and talk about enabling team collaboration. I think collaboration, whether you're in person, whether it's via email like we've all used for many years, or whether it's through some of the modern tools, is absolutely important to delivering that extraordinary experience. So he'll be talking through a little bit of that, but more importantly, showing some of those features and capabilities. And then after Matt, we'll take a short break, and then Jesus will come up and talk about securing the cloud. And he'll talk about a wide range of tools that you have at your fingertips with Microsoft 365 to ensure that your workforce is not only productive and that they can seamlessly access the tools, but they can also secure those tools. And then lastly, after another short break, I'll come up and talk a little bit about secure remote work. I think, still in kind of the intense pandemic, a lot of remote work, a lot of return to office type scenarios happening over the last 6 months. We can tell some great stories about how organizations, some of them were prepared and didn't miss a beat based on some of the things that they've done. And some of them were able to easily get prepared and kind of, shift to a state that they didn't see coming based on the way they've done business in some cases for decades, if not centuries, or at least 1 century. So after that, Carly will come up. Carly Prosciutto, our marketing director, will come up and talk about wrap up. What are the next steps and what is the thing everybody's looking for, the giveaway? So a little housekeeping here about questions. We are doing a live event, so we are encouraging everybody to interact. Typically when we do these types of events, we're doing them in many cities with small to medium-sized groups, and it's heavily interactive. We're asking questions. People are asking questions of us in a live format. Doing this virtually is a little bit different. I think we've kind of mastered that over the summer, but what we're asking is everybody to kind of look in the top right corner of their live event screen. You'll see a Q&A feature. Just to get everybody warmed up for this, I would like everybody to maybe ask a question, but while asking that question, tell us why you're here and what you want to hear the most. and that will be shared with all of our presenters. It won't be shared with everybody else, and we'll be able to tailor the conversation as well as have some of those conversations to ensure that you get the most out of this event today. If you have any trouble with that, reach out to me. You have my email, so kind of you can back up in the slides, grab that, jason.webster@egroup-us.com, and I'm happy to help walk you through it. We also have a team of eGroup professionals, Jesus, myself, and Matt, while the others are presenting, that will be answering questions interactively. So those ones that are relevant to the whole audience, we'll interrupt the presenter and share those, as well as we'll answer them in the chat. So please answer questions or ask questions, and we will answer them as detailed as we possibly can. Also, we'll be taking breaks. Based on the amount of questions we get and some of the back and forth, we really encourage that banter, as I've been saying. We may not start and stop directly on the schedule, so be prepared. We'll take 5 to 10 minute breaks, but at the same time, we'll finish on time. We'll make sure that the content, especially towards the end, is dialed in so that we get you on your way at noon sharp. All right, so diving right in, who is eGroup? We like to say we've delivered 21 years of speed and certainty in the cloud and data center. Over the last 2 decades plus, founded in 1999, we're a private company, family-owned, debt-free, and we always like to say that our customers are our chief investors. So customer satisfaction is at the core of everything we do, and what we're really proud of is throughout 2020, across hundreds of projects, we've been able to maintain a 100% customer satisfaction score, accomplished through surveying, where we average 54.1% of responses, for those surveys. So over half our projects are answered, and so far we're batting 1,000 in 2020. And looking back to 2019, we're doing 98.5. So that's something that we do often. We are always looking for client feedback. Thankfully, a lot of our projects go great, and even when sometimes we get some surprises, we work really hard to make sure we have customer satisfaction and success at the core of everything we do. So who do we serve? We work about 350 commercial, state, local government, across many industries, across North America, Canada, and even internationally, across about 35 or more states in the U.S. A lot of that's our customers taking us broadly across the U.S. and working with international customers. And when we say commercial, we work with the smallest organizations. I think our smallest customer is 3 people, and some of our larger customers are the Fortune 50 names that you would recognize that have tens and hundreds of thousands of people. So experience across the board over the 21 years we've been serving, and we do about 350 projects annually for those customers. Some of our recognition, we'll leave this one up briefly, but we are a Microsoft National Gold Partner, which means we are recognized at the highest level of Microsoft with multiple gold competencies, one being in modern workplace solutions, others being in Azure, even in the data center with solutions like Sharepoint, SQL Server, and some of the management tools like SCCM. We work with all Microsoft technologies across the board, as well as the 2 clouds, Microsoft 365 and Azure. Not quite Dynamics just yet, but it's coming. And throughout time, we're really proud of consecutive award winners, particularly things like the Tech Elite 250, the top 250 IT solutions companies in the U.S. Being able to achieve things like that for our 10th consecutive year is something that we love and we take great pride in. Beyond Microsoft, what else do we do? I think this is relevant when we talk about speed and certainty in the cloud and data center, because we leverage Microsoft solutions and we leverage cloud solutions, but over the last couple decades, we've worked with a lot of partners and through many transformations, not just what everybody's trying to accomplish with SaaS applications and moving things into public clouds and how to build hybrid clouds, but also how to secure your data center, how to architect data centers, and how to work anywhere and everywhere in between. We always like to say that cloud is an operational model, not necessarily a destination, and we back that up because we believe that hybrid cloud solutions are very, very important to IT success. Some applications are destined and still are very relevant in the data center. Some are more tuned for refactoring for public cloud and the efficiencies that you gain there. At eGroup, we help you understand what scenarios make the most sense in which cases, and try to map those solutions. So with that, I know I went really fast through the introductions, but we did that on purpose because I want to get directly to the meat of the things. One thing I will remind everybody, I see we do have some questions coming in, is please ask questions. Please tell us what you're looking for today. And when we do this, what Matt will walk you through is a taste of what we call our Modern Workplace Adoption Roadmap Workshop. And then Jesus will dive a little bit more into some of the technical sides of it. What we ask is that those sessions are highly flexible, so please, drive us in the direction you want to go, and we'll do our best to make sure we address every question. And if we can't, what we'll do is we'll set up some one-on-one time with each of you to make sure that everybody's question specific to your business and specific to your objectives get answered. So without further ado, Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jason. All right. Well, appreciate the attendance today. I'm already seeing some great questions. Again, Matt Renketto. I'm going to be taking you through kind of the modern workplace that Microsoft is presenting. Seeing really good uptake. When I think about Microsoft, the two biggest areas are Teams and then kind of that Azure space where you're seeing tremendous growth, tremendous excitement, and looking forward to kind of walking you through these things. We make a point to not say best practices. Really, the best practice for your organization takes a lot of back and forth. So what we're going to do is really start kind of from the foundation. What is Microsoft 365? Have those, hopefully that foundational information, show you a couple of areas of Teams that we believe are kind of universal. But as you get into specific workflows to your organization, it really is it depends answer. So really, what is M365? We're still seeing a lot of customers that will shorthand, I'm an E3 customer or I'm an E5 customer. And really, Microsoft 365 is just a marketing kind of rebrand at its core. If you look at what that is, though, it started to expand into the security space, into the Windows 10 space, and it really is this super SKU of functionality. So if you are still shorthanding that I'm an E3 customer, we're definitely going to push back and go, well, are you Microsoft 365 or the older O365, which is just the productivity suite? Whether you're just in the productivity suite or across the M365 platform, it really is just those suites. So if you own productivity, if you own the security platform, you own the tools, but really how you configure them will go a long way into what you're going to get out of them, how secure you are, how collaborative, how mobile. So we really think of it as a starter kit. It's great that we own these things, but if they're not configured in the right way and the right way for you, then they're really useless. So, I just kind of throw this up there to understand that marketing. You might have seen Office 365 and some of those places that they flipped. So that's been out there maybe about 4 or 5 months now. We're getting used to it. We still use both because our customers kind of understand both, but know that the names are changing. In each one of those areas, there's going to be tiers. Again, if you say you're an E3 customer, that might denote productivity or the Microsoft suite. When you're in there, you might have an enterprise tier or a frontline tier, which is going to be a little bit more web only, and then business tiers for smaller business, kind of under 300 seat typically. So based on if you were coming up to us, we would lead you in that direction. We would talk about, do you have a lot of frontline workers? Are you all knowledge workers? And each one of those has slightly different entitlements that we can walk through, slightly different costs that we're going to optimize for your scenarios. And with that, I will take it into demos. I did see a question about, is this going to be in, are we going to be recording this? Yes, we are. So know that that'll be in there. I did want to just show you, this is our Teams tenant, heavily redacted. So we'll be in there today, just showing you really how we work. Again, some of these things that I'm going to show you are fairly universal, but it's worth noting that you know, we drink our own champagne, eat our own dog food, as they say, and really feel like this has helped us collaborate, what they call high frequency transaction, you know, collaboration transactions, really is trying to centralize. And to me, that is the vision that we've bought into on the Microsoft side. Microsoft Teams as this hub that that is going to drive all the collaboration that your organization needs to be doing. If you think about, you know, talk tracks that we've had with customers, pretty universally, you know, I get too many emails. Maybe I want to be more video. With COVID, I'm very remote. I'm very mobile. How do I, you know, stay engaged? How do I keep it lively, keep it fun, get work done? Those types of conversations. So very, you know, good kind of points to raise, and we're going to touch on a couple of them today. First and foremost, you know, again, I kind of take it through the left nav of Teams, and again, keep the questions coming. I'd love to know, are you guys, you know, fully into Teams? Are you thinking about getting in there? Are you worried about security or mobility, those types of things? But in general, again, you know, most organizations we walk into are either in Teams or they're thinking about it. You know, they might be an old Skype for Business customer. So oftentimes we'll get is it just kind of Skype rebranded? Definitely not. And that's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because there's a lot more functionality in Teams. It's a bad thing that sometimes takes a bigger lift to get your users comfortable with what's in there. So with going back to school, I've talked to teachers just personally and stuff like that about, you know, they're overwhelmed when they first look at the Teams area. And so to really kind of boil down what you're seeing here, Microsoft's vision of this left nav is really one of applications, you know, the old school bottom nav that you would have had on an OS. As you add applications, you know, your bottom nav of your Windows or your iOS is gonna change, right? It's gonna have more applications. As you think about collaboration apps, that's really what this left nav starts to show. So if you're just using the default, again, no worries, but you always have the ability to add different apps here. To customize that for what you need. You know, one of the things we talk about is, hey, maybe I'm a WebEx shop, maybe I'm a Jabber shop. You know, how do I transition away? And honestly, you can completely move away. You know, just kind of lift and shift and move over. But you can also integrate these things, and I call that out to say that Microsoft has this vision of Teams as a UI. So if you want to use the Teams UI and use an application behind the scenes that is your call platform, you can use the Microsoft service or the third party. And so that ability to integrate first and third party apps, I think, is pretty compelling. Secondly, the second biggest customization, as we get into Teams, we'll talk about some of the tabs you can add and that ability to customize your team and get the applications you need. So with that, couple things that I like around the UI. You have this aggregated activity window. Obviously, I've already come in and we've been messing around today already, but you're going to get the very typical kind of notification windows in your app. Activity is going to aggregate. So if you're a global organization, you're going to see maybe what's gone on the night before, anything that's been driving that. You can customize those notifications. So maybe you only want to see if somebody has mentioned you, which is something we'll talk about in a little bit, or maybe you just want everything. I can say once you get into teams and have a lot of teams, you're probably going to suppress some of that and only use the stuff that's most relevant to you. You've got your chat, which again is persistent. Another big change from Skype for Business, or it's kind of inherently persistent. You could do some things in the Skype for Business world. In Teams, it's kind of that on steroids. That allows for one-to-one communication, allows to one-to-many. It allows you to add folks in, and we'll show a little bit of that as well today. Once you get into that, we're actually on the Teams area. So you see that I've got my teams here. There, you have the ability to kind of drag and drop these to pin certain channels. So if we were messing with general a lot, and that's what you're going to get default, you can pin this, and it actually comes up here. So you can always pin your most relevant, maybe most chatty applications or channels up in the top. And this really allows for kind of curated, compartmentalized communication. So again, as you start to talk about these areas, and I've just got some examples here, but I've showed some examples where maybe I've got a general team, communication thread where we're doing all of our kind of regular communication. What we do a lot at eGroup is our teams are focused on customers. So if I have 5 or 6 projects going with a customer, I can add channels there. To me, that's a pretty big and compelling difference off of a product like Slack, where your highest level is kind of channels. And what I was seeing is kind of channel exhaustion. You were in all these channels. There was a lot of overlap. In this way, you kind of get at least a 2-tier hierarchy where I have these groups. Now I can put channels underneath that and, maybe have project 1, project 2, project 3 versus the team sprawl, as we call it, of, every team being another project. Again, there's no set way you need to do this. If you have a very large project with maybe multiple phases, maybe that's the way you'd like to do it. But I think it's good to be thinking about those things. What I like to say is think about how this is going to be on day 1 and then on kind of day 365. What tenants you might be thinking about for your first couple teams for your organization might be really different once you're in there for a year. And it might not be. We do things like team pilots, which we like to do kind of 30, 60, 90 days. And a lot of that is educating on what we're going to do to set up. But then at the end of a pilot like that, really talk about, hey, how did you guys work? How did, what worked, what didn't work for you in teams, and then tune that administration to meet the organization's needs. A couple things about kind of customizations. So these are pretty much just configurations. I can create these channels, but once you're in a channel, you have the ability to again add any tabs you want. You're going to get posts, which is just kind of the running instant messaging of the team. Files, which is a file structure. We'll come back to it. SharePoint is backing this. So if you're doing any SharePoint document repositories, it's really just an extension of that and literally is the same admin console within the Office 365 admin portal. And then I've deleted the wiki. It kind of gives you a wiki out of the box. I actually prefer to add a OneNote, and that's kind of what I wanted to walk you through a little bit here. If you click on the plus tab, you're going to see that you get a bunch of first and third party apps, and you can add any of these in here. So lists is what we've started to play around with. If you're in Teams these days, that there's kind of a transition away from Planner, or a combination, if you will, of the Planner functionality, the to-do functionality, which is kind of a laundry list of things you have to accomplish, into this more cohesive list function and app. That's just come out, so we're kind of playing around with it. No, immediate feedback or recommendations there, but it is a wait and see, and we all have a lot of to-do lists out there, I'm sure, that we'd love to get better. But I'm going to show you just what I like to do. Again, if you think about our teams as a customer facing, I want to capture all the information about a customer. and I can come in and kind of in here, and I've kind of done this before, but I'm just going to create a new, well, I'll create a whole new notebook and do a test and save that. And again, what's happening here is this is going to be stored kind of behind the scenes in the cloud, accessible anywhere, kind of with the Microsoft backup. And you're just going to get the OneNote experience kind of shimmed within Teams. You can blow this out. You can have all these different areas, and you can go super deep. So again, in the e-group scenario, I might have every meeting that I have around a particular topic or a particular customer, coming in here and say, hey, this is going to be the 9/9 meeting. We're going to take some notes. We're going to finish that up, and now that's in there. So I no longer have this OneNote that's out there that's maybe Matt's, or I have it stored in some odd location, even shared via OneDrive, but it's really the team's notebook. It's not mine. I'm just using my storage. Well, what happens if I leave the organization? We're scrambling. What happens to all that institutional knowledge? So really trying to get the data where it needs to be. Very similarly, when you look at files, we're sharing documents, and you can have multiple folders. So if you think about, don't create teams that are just the for a folder location. You can create something and then have many folders underneath that. Add any documents here, and really just wanted to show, the co-authoring, as we call it. Again, I feel like Google Drive made this very famous. And if you go into a collaboration doc in Google, you get this web-only experience, right? Well, Microsoft has kind of encapsulated that, kind of grabbed that functionality, but you also have the ability to use the tools as you need to. So move that out of the way. So here I've got a document that I've got in here. I can have a conversation or not. So you might see it as this. I can blow out the conversation. And remember, I mentioned @mention. Well, if Jason Webster is in here, and he is, if I want to contact him, there's two ways I can do this. If I do the GRP, which is what we preface, I can contact the whole group. Well, maybe Jason doesn't have the ability or the notifications on. So I'm going to say, hey, here's for the whole group. But you know what? I'm also going to do this and then Jason's name. And you see we're getting IntelliSense, any apps that we've been fooling around with. I'm going to hit up Jason Webster directly. And I'm going to say, hey, Jason, can you take a look at this? He's going to get that. This is going to leverage, you get the little icon that says the whole group has been aware. He's going to get that, and his Windows 10 notifications are going to take over. So he's going to see a pop-up. Hey, Jason, can you look at this? He can come in here and notice that there's a little icon where Jason made a change a little while ago. And now he's in there as we speak. So thanks for connecting me. What you didn't see here was what I call version hell. I didn't have to send Jason a copy of this via email and say, hey, can you take a look at this? And he sends it back and he says, yep, I've sent you another document with my edits. Well, if I send that out to 5 people and I get 5 different versions with their 5 different initials, now it's on me to change all those things. What you also didn't see is any lockout. So because I'm in the document, Jason didn't try to go in and say, you know what, it's locked out. It says that Matt has it checked out for editing, so we're not going to be able to make any edits, Matt. So I'll just make another version. I'll send it to you and I'll send it to everyone, and we have to kind of mess with this.
Hey, Matt,
Sure.
We had a question that I thought might be good for the entire audience. Sarah had asked, is interested in opinions on whether we should remove tenant-wide the add-on or add join teams button. Talking about removing it, more around the, trying to train people on the creation and management of teams, how we're going to go through some of those things. Is that something you might want to touch on, how can you enable users to make sure that, Teams doesn't go crazy, right? And people start adding them everywhere?
Yeah. So you're talking about the actual add a team button.
Yep.
Yeah, so you have the ability to completely turn that off. You have the ability to have a group that's a little bit more advanced, kind of PowerShell enabled, but you can have a group that is the group that can create teams. In general, again, these are rules of thumb, and certainly would be impacted by the size of your organization and how crazy it could get out of hand. Um, you don't want to put up too many barriers. So the instinct can be to lock that down, put a request in. It has to be blessed, and then I'll go ahead and as an IT administrator, I'll create the team. There's nothing wrong with that. And again, for large organizations, you're definitely going to skew in that direction. But remember that as much friction as you add to this, you're going to have to kind of deal with. And so what you don't want to go is too far down that spectrum and have, I haven't really used Teams because, maybe I use it outside or I use other products that are not as governed. And they're super easy. I just can create, maybe I've got a shadow IT collab solution out there and I can do everything I want. But when I go to IT, I put this ticket in, I ask for a team. They say that their SLA is 5 days. I've kind of moved on. What that also may do is that inherently there's nothing different about a team functionality wise than there is a multi-user chat. And what you don't want to do is, we've talked back about these teams and how we have this threaded communication. I like the multi-user chat for what it is, kind of quick hitters. But if you limit the chat or the team creation functionality, what you may be doing is you're dispersing all those groups to create multi-user persistent chat sessions. And when you go into those sessions, you can still add files, you can still do these things. So you may start to see that, great, I've locked down teams. Well, now nobody's asking for teams. Why not? Because they've moved on very quickly. What I would say is kind of that sweet spot as we look at your specific scenario might be to say, okay, we're gonna put out some tenants because I definitely don't want you to create a team called finance department when I already have a team called finance department, or a distribution list that's called finance department. And now I'm seeing it in there and I kind of can't figure out which one's which. So that's kind of why we've created the prefix to all of our teams. I think that's a good call out, that if I created a team called finance department, it would still have a prefix. You also might want tenants of, there might be a light approval process. I just don't want to duplicate things or say, hey, like we at least want to look at this and see kind of what's the need. But again, the overarching tenant, don't put too much friction to the process or your users will disperse.
I would even add to that, Matt. Yeah, it's a great question, and kind of I'll tell a quick rip from the headlines example. Was talking to an organization. They were saying, I think our users are going to struggle with this. They're used to, kind of legacy platforms, things like Skype that don't have as much flexibility. So how do we go about that? I think you want to enable self-service and you want to enable your team members. But as part of a team's rollout, your idea of putting things in group and kind of enabling people to have it as it goes on is spot on, depending on your user base and depending on your rollout plan. Because one of the things you want to do is not just turn Teams on and have people use it. You want to at least provide the basics training, and that can be done through kind of adoption activities that are things like a little bit of gamification, some lunch and learn style stuff, so that people can join in. We can record sessions like these to be able to provide people on-demand content so that they can learn and relearn and re-review how to do it. But just the basics of what is a team and what is a channel and how do you hide channels? How do you organize your channels? We find most people that get frustrated with, I can't find anything in Teams, kind of boil down to three things. They're not using search effectively. They're not kind of pruning with the hide features, as well as moving their teams that's most important to them to the top. And they haven't really understood how to use those 2 or 3 basic features to keep things organized from a personal view. And then from an organization view, it's kind of okay. And I haven't said this in a lot of ways in the past, but it's kind of okay to have the back end be like a proliferation of massive teams that live on and on and on. It's stored in Microsoft, so you don't have to store it. And if people know how to organize stuff and you have a good process for going back and reviewing and retiring teams, you can be very effective. But it absolutely has to be part of any successful rollout to provide that education.
Great, Jason. Keep those questions coming. I love the back and forth. So while we're talking about kind of document in every channel, understand that this is just SharePoint behind the scenes, as we said, and you actually have the ability to open this in SharePoint. You can kind of click in here, and you're going to get the well, I'm in as a demo. You're going to get the SharePoint experience, provided you're not logged in as two people at the same time, which most of you are not. One of the biggest reasons I used to go there, and I think this speaks to cloud speed, is previously the synchronization button only showed up in SharePoint. They've now exposed that in here. And so I've heard Jason say this often, users will be like, I don't really like SharePoint. I'm not really in SharePoint. Oh, they're using SharePoint. If they're using OneDrive, they're using Teams. That's actually SharePoint behind the scenes. You've just got a different UI on that, a little bit more tailored for the use case. So really wanted to show kind of this synchronization button, because one of the bigger questions I get around Teams, OneDrive, any of those is, well, maybe my users are more laggards. They're just used to that home drive, the H drive. They're used to their department drive. Are they really going to get this cloud story? And so I wanted to show kind of the difference that you're going to see. If you look here, this is just my Windows 10 experience. I happen to have kind of my OneDrive for eGroup and my personal drive. But if you had a network share, it would be kind of showing up down here. And again, they would be in there day after day, hitting their file share. But that file share might take VPN access. It might take, I have to be on the network. We don't even have a VPN solution. So how do I kind of look at and synchronize? You can see kind of nothing up our sleeve. We've got this ability to synchronize any SharePoint area. And I've got a couple of our weekly tech talks. I'm going to head back into Teams and just say, you know what, I'm going to be in this these documents a lot, and I want that Windows 10 experience. Again, at any point, I can open this doc by clicking it. I could download it. I can open it directly within the app or within Teams. But for whatever reason, I just see that I'm going to be working with this document a lot. I can hit synchronize, and because I'm in there, it's going to use the same SharePoint functionality to synchronize that back and forth. I believe, let me actually click out of this and back in. Didn't seem to like that, or maybe it did. Let's go over. My synchronization button is not working. Interesting. That's probably a result of me being in a couple different users. Well, let me show you kind of a couple things that I wanted to do. The synchronization will show up right here, and I've been playing around with it and didn't want to show you the eGroup customizations and configuration for security a little bit later. So I'm kind of in as two users right now, a demo user and myself. One of the big changes when we start to synchronize is actually, this is the presentation I'm going through right now, which is why it's open and it's kind of synced real time. But notice that the status, I've pulled this down so I get a green checkbox, but these are just stubs. So it looks like the Windows 10 experience. I can pull any of these down. And when I click on these, like this is the presentation Jason was actually going through. When I click on one of these, it'll move from a cloud very quickly, pull down, download, and then you're good to go. Now it's open. So it's over here. So in that way, you're saving storage. You don't really need to use that storage up, but it looks like that file is there. And a lot of us are connected to the internet. Ubiquitously, you're going to be able to pull that down. There's going to be a slight pull down, and then you're going to be good to go. Every time you open this from now on, even with the checkbox, you're going to be able to see the that it pulls down the latest and greatest bits. Using that sync engine, and you're always going to get that. Now, if you ever fill up, you can elect to free up space by sending that file or a whole folder out. You can elect to always keep it on the device. So you have some ability to kind of go back and forth here, and use the Windows 10 experience if that's what you choose. So that's kind of document sharing in a nutshell. Last call out I'll make is that we don't suppress it. Most of you probably will. But again, this speaks to the, hey, I want everyone to use, Teams, but maybe we've got a big investment with a different cloud storage provider. You can pull that in there. You can have that ability to do that. Even within, a team, you get your SharePoint kind of document repository out of the box, but you could elect to connect a different SharePoint area. Again, so there's a lot of flexibility here to fit your needs, to kind of transition in, or to use those things, side by side. We spoke about cloud speed. A big kind of feature that we heard was the ability to have private channels. By default, and this is intentional, you can only add users at the team level. And so again, when you think about being a little bit constrained there, that's a feature, not a bug. If you think about these things, remember SharePoint behind the scenes, when I'm talking to users and they say, well, what if I want to create really granular rights within these buckets or within these folders? I'd really start to take a step back, because if you've been a SharePoint administrator for long periods of time, that can get pretty unwieldy. So they're in teams trying to get simplicity as being the lead. If I have a team and for some reason I want to add this person, they're part of the team, I want to collaborate with them, but they can't see folder X, Y, and Z, it's a little bit of a red flag. Like, are you sure that that person is actually on the team? But if you do have a scenario, I'll use this scenario, maybe I have a department that's finance. Everybody in the finance department can collaborate. They kind of get access to the same areas, but maybe I've got some kind of keys to the kingdom. Maybe our company's financials that everyone can't see. That's when I can create a private channel. It's going to create a private kind of new area of SharePoint, because again, that's the security model here. And your users that are in the full team are not even going to get to see these ones that have the lock on it. So in that way, there's no stumbling onto it, or any of that stuff. They wouldn't even know it existed. And then what you're going to have to do is, as an owner of that group, you now own having to set up the security for that private channel. So again, I would use it when it's needed, but overall, when you're creating that team, the thought is, everyone on that team has access to everything. And again, the UI of Teams allows for you to manage the team or add a member, add a channel. So if I go into manage team, it's going to show you kind of who's in there as an owner and who's in there as a guest. And so you have the ability to kind of manage that. I've seen people that needed to take screenshots of this, for auditors, really get an easy UI. I can switch these people out. Owner and members is your only two options. And again, simplicity is the key. They're trying to say, hey, let's try to give you just a set number of options and give you one UI as an owner to be able to do these things. So again, if you're thinking, well, I want Matt to be an owner of a team, but I don't really want them to be able to mess with security or add other people, maybe a team isn't a good fit for that, because that's really the model that Teams is trying to perform. So we talked a little bit about, and I just wanted to show you kind of what we're doing. I've created some logic apps and stuff like this, but I'm going to go into these areas when we talk about customization and integration. A couple things that I would call out. Obviously, we've got our persistent chat. That's going to show all of the notifications. So here you see, I created that test notebook earlier. We collaborated, and here's my note about, hey, Jason, can you take a look at this? He could actually reply here or reply in the document itself. So you get that running list of activity. But I wanted to scroll up a little bit and kind of show you some of the channelized features, right? So say I've got a 10, 15 person group here. I want to ask him a question. I can use an app like Poly, kind of a play on poll, to ask a question of the group. Again, in line, it's going to give you a Windows 10 notification and ask you to provide some feedback. I'm going to show the results to the group. So that's the kind of integration type of stuff, third-party app. I also wanted to show you that I've created a flow outside of this, just kind of an example that, on Friday, I say, hey, remember to put in your timesheet. Instead of sending that via email, I send it directly to this team. And it would be just as easy to send that to an app mention, send it directly to a person. So, you have that ability to really start to layer in Power Automate and Flow and logic apps. My logic app, if you wanted an example of this, it's really just running out in Azure, and it's saying, hey, if I see anything that has to do with SpaceX or with eGroup, send a note that says, hey, SpaceX tweeted or eGroup tweeted. But really, sky's the limit there, because again, you can do anything with a logic app, and that's going to be costed out based on firing. So if it fires once a day, that might cost you a penny, and it's going to be out there, cloud enabled. Just very, very cheaply getting your communications out there. If you go into any channel, you have the ability to get an email address. So this is going to be a not easy to guess email address. So it's not going to say like Azure alerts on call. It's going to be a little bit of hieroglyphics. But imagine taking that email address and saying, I'd like to go ahead and send my notification system, my alert system. Maybe you already have something like a SolarWinds. That's probably sending out to your admins today. What are they doing with those emails? They've probably created a filter and they're sending it to some other area of their email because they're getting too many things. That's all inherently happening here. So if I have my administrator team and one of the channels is Azure alerts or any possible alert combination, you can hook into where your users are already working and kind of stop the context switching. So a lot of ways to hook into those things, build your own custom flows, hook into email addresses, really sky's the limit. I'll hit a couple of these areas, so those are the two big ones. But as you get into calendar, again, once you're connected, your calendar is just going to come up there. You have that ability to create a new meeting at any point or to meet now. That's just going to be that same ability that you would have in Outlook. So, always have that function. And again, it speaks to, hey, where your users work, you certainly probably want to educate and standardize. But if your users are more comfortable creating a meeting in Outlook, they don't have to come over to Teams to create a Teams meeting. You can do all that stuff within Outlook. Calls is going to be the default area. And so when you get in here, I've got kind of some of my favorites. Because I have the calling service, you can see that I have a dial pad. If you didn't have the call service, like the usage-based stuff, understand that this dial pad wouldn't be there. But at any point, I can dial via video or voice just by pressing the button. And that's going to be a VoIP-enabled call. It's going to be completely within Teams, and you're not going to have to pay anything. So when you talk to users about Teams voice, typically what it comes to is, hey, maybe we have a legacy system, maybe we have a call center where I've already built some customization. I don't really want to lift that up, but a lot of my folks, they just, they don't really have a need for that type of functionality. I want to get to a cloud solution. I don't want to run a lot of, internal services. I am in a cloud solution, and maybe Microsoft's UI is compelling to me. Remember, this doesn't have to be Microsoft usage. It can be, a third party, or we could even integrate what you have today into the Microsoft UI. Those are more advanced scenarios. I would say that we talk to folks about, hey, I just want Microsoft. But even in that, if you take like an education space, those users might have needs around a PA system or around a panic button or E911 requirements that necessitate some type of integration, or at least configuration. So have that voice ability. And I think I showed you earlier, say I was running the Cisco platform, you could suppress the Microsoft one and just use Jabber or add it there. So you have that ability to kind of move those things around to really add a third or first party app as needed. One thing that I'll call out too that I don't think gets a ton of use is, I'll pick on an app like this Who that I could add at any point, and you can kind of go see where this is at a large enterprise. This is using AI and kind of your existing data to get that in there. And again, remember I said that I can customize this if I move away. Notice that it goes away, so I'm only using it kind of transiently. Now take a look at this. If I do a // notice that I have a lot of these. And again, I think these are something that the collaboration suites that are out there today make a really good use of shortcuts. But notice that I can go into Who and say, who is Matt's manager? And it's actually going to add that and say, let me just, it couldn't find Matt's manager. So I'm going to say, who is Matt?
Hey, Matt, while you're doing that,
Yeah.
Bridget asked, how does all this work in a hybrid environment? Does Teams sync with an on-premise mailbox calendar and everything, for example? So, kind of in that hybrid, you're still on Exchange on premises, still with Outlook, but you got some things in the cloud?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. Just wanted to show kind of, remember those shortcuts, do that / I can do a search like who is Matt. It's going to say, well, which one? I'll pick myself. And what you get is, who I work with, my peers, my manager, really cool functionality. And if you said, hey, I want to do that all the time, you can come in here and you can pin this so that it stays around. Again, you might have to work with your admin group. They might have forced what you see in your left nav. So getting to the hybrid solution, in general, when you think about where is this calendar entry stored, we are in Exchange Online, and that's going to be the easiest way to light that functionality up. Typically, if you were already working on making that move, we would say, well, yeah, I think it's wise, just from a do I want to train users two ways to carry forward the Exchange Online effort. Because once you're there, it's kind of set up, it's already kind of cloudified, if you will, and a lot of that functionality is there. If you are looking to stay on-prem, I believe that it is possible to expose those things, but it's going to take a lot of network heavy lifting. Not sure if Jesus is on that can kind of speak at any deeper depth, but really what I would speak to prerequisites. We used to talk about, hey, there's a product called AD Connect. If you think about you're on a domain and I need to get my identities out to cloud, the product has morphed names, but right now it's called AD Connect, which essentially takes your on-premise users and it sends them up and synchronizes them to the cloud. That's really the only, requirement that's needed to run Teams. Once those users are out there, you can move straight into Teams, but the Teams would have to have a user base essentially. We used to see almost exclusively the reason you would do the AD Connect and synchronize your users was the first thing you were going to do is move Exchange to Exchange Online. And that still really is high up on the priority list. But what you're seeing now is even if you're not anywhere in the cloud, there's this, kind of groundswell, if you will, of, hey, I'm seeing a lot about Teams. People are using Teams, or people are using a competing product. And hey, we own Teams. Why don't we move there? And so we've done some Teams pilots where users don't have, Azure Active Directory or AD Connect set up at all. They're looking to go from ground zero, completely on premise, to running Teams. And so we do set that part up. Just educating them that, hey, if you want to ramp that up very quickly, if you go into calendar, there wouldn't be that information. So it would be suppressed, or you might want to remove it to avoid confusion.
Right. Yeah. And good points there, Matt. You can turn Teams on and just start using it. But the full best experience is when your mailbox is online, when you're using OneDrive, when SharePoint's enabled. That's going to light up everything because they're dependent services. So when you're in a hybrid environment, you can tie some of those local deployments into Teams as well. There's more setup that's required for that because, like Exchange, for instance, we're doing more than just moving mail back and forth at this point. We really have to integrate it almost like an additional app with permissions. And the OAuth has to be set up, and all of that has to be working between there. And for the best experience, you also need to run a fairly recent deployment of Exchange. So you should be on 2016 or 2019. But even in those scenarios, there are some things that won't be supported in Teams.
Great, thanks, Jesus. All right, so again, we showed that these applications are there. We've shown some of the document synchronization. I just wanted to show a little bit. I don't want to steal Jesus's thunder as he gets into some of the security side, but I do think it's worth noting. I'm going to head over to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and this is where I'm just in my demo client to kind of fool around with configuration. One of the stories about M365 that I like to tell is that, admin.microsoft.com and like portal.azure to get you to the Azure side are really, entry points to me. I really, if you've been an administrator for 5 or so years, you know that everybody had a different URL, and there's one or two of them out there from an admin console standpoint that are different. And they're so frustrating at this point, because I really love going in and having everything be kind of something.microsoft.com. Microsoft has worked really hard over the last, kind of 3 to 5 years to standardize those things. And I come in here when I can't remember all of these, you could have them bookmarked, you could just remember them. But I love coming in here from a demo perspective just to show you that all of your admin centers are here. And so again, what we say is there's tenant-wide configuration, and then there's very service-specific configuration. And so security and compliance many times is more a kind of broad configuration, but there are settings in these different areas about how you can set up Teams or SharePoint, for example. And I've opened up a couple of windows already just to kind of show you, because again, as we get into Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, the question we often get when you're not in there is, I'm super worried about security. My users have used a network share, they understand it's limiting, or I have to be on VPN, but that's also a blessing, right? They have to be on VPN to get this. And as soon as I put that in the cloud, how is a user going to be secure? And so I really wanted to show you kind of a couple things. One is, I have this ability to slider, and you might come in here and say, hey, I can share with anyone. That may not be what you want to do. It literally is as easy as just pulling this down and saying that I want no external sharing. I want this to essentially feel like a network file share, right? Where I've got to kind of be on net to do these things. Now you don't, but again, if you think about the external sharing experience, we can set this up, and we often do, to say, hey, if you're very worried about use cases, let's lock this down for our pilot, kind of understanding where we need to get, and then see if we can start to let in a little bit more permissive posture. You've got some other settings in here, I think, that are pretty neat. What is the default? So if I go to share something, I'd like to at least default it to only people in your organization. Again, just a catch-all. You can change that, but at least this is the default. And there is the ability to actually lock some of that stuff down if you need to. So really, just the ability to kind of look at some of the sharing policies very quickly. Another thing I wanted to show you was just, if you go into the security and compliance area, again, you're going to have a lot of intelligence. O365, all of the cloud services are hooked in, and there's a lot of telemetry coming out of that. If you want to look, setting up your dashboards, setting up kind of what's going on out there. And then I wanted to come into data loss prevention, DLP, because again, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I did just want to get to the point of creating a policy to show you. Let's get into financial. Say I was going to create a PCI policy for, and that's kind of a credit card, protection policy. If I go in here and create this policy and I say, where do I want that to protect my users? You just get these sliders. And one of the compelling things when I think about tenant-wide configuration, tenant-wide functionality, is this ability to say, hey, I'm not just protecting email and worried about leakage from an email standpoint. What happens if folks start sharing sites? What happens if folks start sharing, things from OneDrive or even within Teams? And that can become pretty advanced. If you think about even, labeling or looking for data classifications out there, same rules apply. I'm not just looking at, Exchange emails or files. I can be looking in a lot of different areas. Protection really works the same way. So if you're worried about documents that are coming in via email that your users could be clicking on, understand that those same documents might be coming in via Teams or via other channels. So really having that holistic ability to protect your users now that those services and the collaboration services are getting wider and wider is pretty compelling. So heading back into Teams, a lot of ways you can customize, a lot of ways you can kind of hook into your collaboration where you need to. The last thing I wanted to do was kind of show the meeting experience, and for that I wanted, sharing and meeting, I'm going to head over into this demo area of my Outlook. I've shared a document. I'm kind of in my demo area, but we talked a little bit about, and you saw how I shared a file, or I pinged Jason and told him to look at a file for me. But really wanted to also show you, because I feel like a lot of people are used to sharing that document via email, maybe with a lot more context. And if I send a document to, say, Jason, notice that instead of, and he's got his out of office on, instead of sharing a document, I can actually share the link. And so two things happen here. Notice that if I'm an external user, or if an external user is on this chain, I probably will still have to attach it as a copy. But when I'm internal, because of my rules, I'm saying, hey, I can only share this document internally. I can now share this link. And I'll show you kind of the difference here. To the user, the only difference they would notice is this this cloud icon. This is saying that this is not a local file. This is actually the cloud link. But to an end user, again, they double click on it and it opens the same way it would any other time. You can then send this out, add your context. they're going to open it. And again, the one education thing I would say is if they start to pull this down and start to save their copies, you're going to have to kind of educate them that, hey, that kind of defeats the purpose of sharing a link. Your users will get used to that very quickly. Again, if this is the final copy, you may not want to share this way. You actually want it to be, locked in. But what I see a huge amount, I would say kind of the 80-20 rule applies. 80% of the time, I want people to edit directly within my doc. So this can look at Teams, it can look at OneDrive, SharePoint documents, any cloudified document, any document you're stored in the cloud has this this co-authoring experience. And in that way, I can get all the results. And if I was sending this to Jason, he can just come back to me in Teams or in the email and say, hey, I put my ads there, and all the things about kind of tracking changes and stuff applies there. So that's kind of the sharing experience for your OneDrive. The other thing that's very big, again, is the new Teams meeting. So if I create a Teams meeting here, wanted to just call out a couple things. We do have the call-in number enabled. So I get these two lines, which allow for you to kind of down convert into the calling experience. If you have the Teams service without that call-in, you'll essentially just see this VoIP enabled link. That's clickable on a lot of, on any kind of web enabled browser. Folks are going to click on that. Again, if you think, well, they don't have a phone number, how would they call in from their phone? If you have that Teams app, that'll just fire up Teams in your iOS or Android device, and you'll get a VoIP experience. I feel like for all but the most kind of rural driving, I typically just connect, even though I have this phone number and there's some functionality that allows for you to dial in and be on the team session. I use the VoIP experience, so that has gotten better. Microsoft is actually rolling out a new codec that is supposed to improve that voice quality even better in kind of low bandwidth situations. But even now, barring a kind of a flip over, like if you're going from wireless to mobile, walking out of the house type of scenarios, you'll see a little bit of a drop and come back. Or if I'm driving, I might reach a dead zone, and it kind of same thing. It'll say you've got some poor quality. But I really like that. If your user base, again, is working with external users, a lot of times that call-in number can be a little bit of a security blanket. But remember, what you're not going to get via that call-in, if that's what you're doing exclusively, is if I elevate within Teams, I want to have a video meeting. Well, you're not going to be able to get that. If I want to share my screen, you're not going to be able to get that. So I would definitely work to tell your users, try to come in via that format, via the VoIP format. And if you want to dial in, their Teams will be able to link the phone number dial in, or it'll even dial out to your number and connect those for you. Again, when I say, Teams meeting, that just came up. If you ever wanted to elevate a typical meeting, just a couple little features. I've sent this to myself as an example, but you have the ability within if somebody sent me an email and I want to take that into an IM, I can pull that directly in. If I wanted to say, hey, that's pretty good, I'm going to go ahead and go to a meeting. This is going to come in regular, and then I just add this button. And once you have Teams installed, that's going to be there. You pull Teams in, it's going to add your VoIP, your phone number, and then we've added some customization. This actually is what we've had a couple users do. Large organizations like a healthcare organization, where we just right up in their face tell them kind of how that best experience is going to be. Any of these browsers will work. Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Chromium, which uses that same area, and Microsoft is working really hard to get kind of even the Safari will work to there's a little bit limited functionality, but as far as joining a meeting, it works seamlessly. But on these, it's a little less. You're kind of bound by what the browsers themselves will allow for. But most of the users are using a Chrome or now Chromium. That's going to get the vast majority. And like I said, with Safari, if you've got a pure Mac user, you can join an email or join a meeting from an email without any issue. And if you've got the Teams app installed on your Apple device, that's going to solve all those problems. It's going to open in Teams anyway. And with that, I'll go ahead and cancel out and come on back to our session. So how does M365, how does all of this work for your organization? Again, Teams is that hub, but you can't even license Teams alone because, I think you heard Jesus say it, there's so many services that are working to kind of fully light up all of the Teams experience. So what we typically do is host a modern workplace roadmap session. These are kind of flexible multi-day engagements that typically come when you have an upcoming renewal. You're kind of, hey, I'm thinking about E3 or E5, where are these things? And again, this isn't just, workplace, modern workplace. This also might be security or Windows 10 functionality, but I've got an upcoming one and I just want to understand how I'm going to use this. And if I'm using Teams heavily, maybe a purchase makes sense. And if I'm not, maybe it doesn't. So just want to understand how to get this right. Or you already had a renewal. We walk into a lot of organizations where, maybe it's an IT organization and security or Windows 10 or just procurement has bought something. And we want to get max value. We want to understand what functionality we now have at our disposal, and we want to roll it out right the first time. And so, again, what we talk about in that first day is all of those services that are behind the scenes and the security, compliance, governance that goes around them. If you might have a couple users or an organic rollout of Teams, kind of no harm, no foul. But as an IT organization, if I roll this out, it's got to be bulletproof. It's got to, I've got to account for all these scenarios. So I want to do it and roll it out the right way. We also look again for some of these bigger ones. Like we said, you're probably going to look at your existing security stack. What are you running? What do you now own or are you about to own? Can we look at a consolidation story, both from a cost perspective, a functionality perspective, a simplification perspective? Again, back to that, portal experience that I can go and do things like data loss protection and email protection and maybe kind of threat alerting all in one UI. And then day 4, day 5 don't have to be kind of right after that. We might have some kind of proof of concept deployment. So that may be a Teams pilot where we can set that up as early as kind of day 4, day 5, but that's going to run for a long period of time. And we're going to be side by side with your organization to roll that out. That might be a Teams voice. Again, maybe you're running Teams, but now you want to roll out a couple of users. Teams conferencing, obviously, might be in there. It might be kind of the Exchange migration. You're running Teams, but now I'm ready to get Exchange out there. So a lot of scenarios based on the services, based on where your organization is, and where you need to get. And again, that's what the early days go into. But then what we try to do on the end is if you're looking for something kind of tangible that's getting rolled out, we have a lot of time for that. So, again, looking to get full value out of your Microsoft bundle, ramping up things like Teams or Teams Voice and getting that enterprise-wide adoption, or locking down what you have today. And that might be within the applications themselves, or that might be holistically within Azure Active Directory, SSO, MFA, tenant-wide, conditional access rules. And with that, that's kind of it for me. If you want to know more, if any of these kind of roadmap sessions sound appealing in any of those spaces, I just ask you to reach out, and we can start the conversation. I appreciate that. Appreciate the time today. Hopefully it was enjoyable. Again, doing this digitally is different. Typically, we would come in and have either a roadshow, or when we were doing these, with an organization, kind of whiteboard these types of things out. If we were doing one-on-one, we can use the digital whiteboard functionality and go a little bit deeper. Questions we get often are, what is our methodology? So talking about how we roadmap those things out and going a bit deeper on that. And then talking about kind of the outcome, success stories that we've done, and maybe a redacted document, just to see the level of detail you're going to get out of one of those assessments. So Jason will be covering some of the success stories, kind of genericized, but we've seen really good uptake on this. Both organizations kind of coming back and asking for implementation after a roadmap, or just feeling like, yeah, I kind of know where my next, 1, 3, 5 years is going to be, and we can do it ourselves. So I've seen outcomes either way that are very successful. So thank you again for the time.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to everybody for the active participation. As we said, we usually do these in person. Sometimes they're our most successful events of the year because we do get a lot of interaction, but I can absolutely say you have kept us busy with both the public comments as well as the private ones. So Matt, as you go back through, circle back to any of those that you want to elaborate on, please, and kind of connect and have some of those side conversations. As Jesus comes up, Matt will be in the chat. So if you have any direct questions based on Matt's presentation, feel free to address him directly. And we can kind of go through those and answer them. But great questions so far. Also, thanks for the shout out to the workshop, Matt. I always say with the workshop, the two things that I love most about them is, three things. I put one in the chat. Is it really starts with a lot of these questions that you're all asking in the chat create a lot of questions in our heads about, okay, what is the user's use case? What does success mean for that person, that business specifically? Who needs to do things like this? So really understanding more about your use case is the beginning of it, understanding everything that you all need to be successful, because not everybody needs every piece of technology to operate their business. They need just enough IT, right? Is simple and effective is what we're always after. The second thing is we got some feedback on, I love this product that Matt was talking about. Sharing those stories, we get the opportunity to do this across hundreds of customers. So we see a lot of what works and what doesn't work. So when we do those workshops, we try to share that candidly, like stay away from that. These people this is the reason that didn't work. This is why it did. So that can be effective. And then really, I think the thing I always like about it is we try to make it actionable. It's a flexible conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning, we come about these flexibly. We want to be able to take questions. We've all been doing this for more years than we want to admit. So we're comfortable taking any question live and not stumbling on it. So we can kind of go many different ways. But at the end of it, we want to leave you with a roadmap so that you know what's first and what's second and then what's next and where you're going to be, which also clarifies that licensing story, because we often get asked right out of the gate, I don't understand Microsoft licensing. I don't understand the SKUs. I don't understand this. And our ask is always just trust us. Give us a few hours of the time, maybe a half day as we go through these workshops. Let us understand what you need, and then we'll come back and clarify the best way to purchase it with everything from cost models from 1 year, 3 year, 5 year total cost of ownerships, what licensing programs are the best for you. We operate in all different licensing programs across all of our different customers. So we're able to kind of simplify that conversation so that you get what you need and not anything more. So with that, lots of interest. We're right on time. Lots of interest coming up in the next section. I think the first several questions asked, I'm really interested in the security part. So we're setting a high bar for Jesus, but I know he can meet it. Feel free to continue to interact, ask Jesus questions directly, and Matt and I will answer the ones that we can, and we'll pass off the other ones that we think are, maybe pertinent for the entire audience to Jesus as part of his presentation. So right now we're going to go on a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 10:30 Eastern time. Allow everybody to kind of reload, and then Jesus will kick off his presentation.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Welcome back, everybody. Thanks again to Matt for the presentation earlier, and I can't again say thank you enough for the engagement we're getting in the chat section. It definitely helps us dial in the message to make it relevant. So from some of the initial questions, I think security is going to be a topic of interest. So please continue to ask questions as we go. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Jesus Shelby, who will walk us through security and Microsoft 365.
Hey, great. Thanks, Jason. So thanks, everyone. Again, just reiterate my thanks, that Jason's given to everyone. So we know taking time out of your day can be hectic, right? Everybody's busy, especially in IT. So we're going to dive into cloud security. This, following the theme of today, is going to focus around Microsoft 365 specifically. There are, of course, two other big cloud areas within Microsoft, both Azure and the dynamic side of the cloud. But, this will stay around the productivity suite here with the Microsoft 365 stack. One big call out that I'm going to start with is every subscription, no matter what you have, is going to have access to what's called Secure Score. So if you don't know where to start, if you're struggling, like how do I implement my security, if you're not following a specific framework, or you have a specific guide that you have to meet, Microsoft has created one for you. So, and this is called Secure Score. And they've done it in a way kind of to gamify it. They've weighted some of these controls and they've given you scores so that you can see how you rate over time, what scores you get as you implement different controls. And in some cases, you can even see how you compare to other similar organizations that fit your profile. The Secure Score is in the admin portals that Matt showed earlier. And I'm going to jump in here and show you what that looks like. If I can get my screen popping up. There we go. It's hiding from me. So the Secure Score here is inside of the Microsoft 365 security portal. So earlier, when we saw Matt jump into the admin portal, we had a whole host of different admin centers that we could get into, right? You could drop into Exchange and SharePoint, but there are two others that are out there specific to security and compliance. One here is the Security Center. The other one is the Compliance Center, and they have different controls that are available through each. But Secure Score is going to be under security, as that makes the most sense, right? So here, I'm going to click back over to the Overview tab. You will see this loads up. In this tenant here, our score is rating a 17.24% out of the 100% if we implemented and put every control that was in place. If we look over to the right, you'll see I'm being compared to other organizations and other ones that have similar profiles that sit this demo tenant that I'm on with the same number of users and licenses and so forth that are enabled are sitting a little bit higher at 22%. So when you're in there and looking at it, yours is going to be lined up a little bit better, probably to the industry that you're in based on the company profile that's set up within the organization, as well as your particular licensing and the number of counts of people that you have licensed in the portal. So this will look a little bit different for you. If we scroll down on this page, you will see that there's a list of improvement actions that we can do and how it impacts your score. So at any point in time, you can use this list to improve your security posture. So right here, require MFA for administrator roles, right? If we click into that, you'll see we'll get more information in here. This also works somewhat, if you're in security and you're familiar with the terminology, this would be somewhat like a POAM, right? So your plan of actions and milestones that lets you track how you're going to implement this, when you're going to implement it. If you just decided not to implement it and you've accepted it, this tracks all of that for you if you don't have that separate system. Gives you some information around what the impact is, and then, of course, how to actually implement it. Microsoft walks you through this on this specific item here. So it's very, very helpful to get started when you don't know where to get started. Other things I will let you know that's very helpful here is if we jump over here to improvement actions, this is like that lower plane we just saw, except for now we can see all of the actions that are listed. we can export this. If you export this out, you can have a separate Excel sheet that you work off of separately, and that can also integrate into other systems that you may have. So if you are running and tracking things through some other configuration management tool, like ServiceNow, for instance, you can take that, you can add entries and map that through that, or any other tool for that matter. So that's Secure Score, and again, that's available for everyone, regardless of what subscription you have, what licenses are turned on. Those will all be out there, and it will go through and tell you things that cover everything that you're licensed for, as well as some of the additional tools you might want to opt into or buy into to cover that particular item. So today I'm going to go over some very specific common scenarios. So Office 365 E3 is a pretty common SKU that we see quite a bit, and the other one is the E3 plus the EMS E3. And believe it or not, these actually cover quite a wide variety of the other licensing types that you can get within Office 365. So regardless of which one you're on, you should be able to take some of these things that we're going to talk about today and actually implement those in your tenant if you desire to do so. So Office 365 E3 specifically comes with all of the productivity apps that we somewhat talked about today already. We talked about Teams, Exchange Online, SharePoint, you know, in the Office apps. Those are all included in there. But on top of that, this actual subscription has some base level security tools that are available in there. So things like configuring Azure Rights Management. So that allows us to encrypt some information that's actually in the portal, documents and email, as well as DLP and a few other retention specific rules that are available in E3 that wouldn't be available, say, on an E1 type of subscription. So this is kind of where we have like our best value type of subscription for most organizations. So one of the first things we usually get asked for when we're coming in, because the first workloads that are out there, is usually email and email encryption. So Microsoft includes this out of the box, you know, and again, it starts with E3 because you do need access to that Azure Rights Management service. Now, previously, you had to go in and actually activate this service, but for quite a while now, this has been enabled on most tenants that already have it on there. So if you have an E3, you have an E5, even the smaller business premium SKUs, this is going to be turned on for you automatically by default. So nothing for you to do to use it. But the one thing I do recommend, what you see here, is to customize that template. Out of the box, it has like the Office 365 logo and just some generic messaging, but you can enter very specific text in these templates. As far as your company organization specific text, and you can also swap out your logo so that it looks like, you know, it's coming from you specifically. Now, the downside with this one here is this is not available in the portal. So when you're going in, if you're looking around and you're clicking around, you're not going to see specifically anywhere to change this portal. You're going to have to do that from PowerShell. You're going to use the Exchange Online PowerShell modules. Microsoft does document this very well on a step-by-step basis on how to do it. And once it's in there, you can then implement that inside of your mail rules to use the new templates. And that's what users will see when they are using that message encryption. So if you are using message encryption today, this is very similar to what you get in Proofpoint or Zix, right? Or other services out there that will encrypt mail inline. This is just built into the platform and you can use that natively. If you haven't used mail encryption before, what it does is it's going to take a message that you want to send, it's going to encrypt it into an attachment, and it's going to go out to your recipient, and only that recipient is going to be able to open that attachment. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here. So right here, I've actually sent an encrypted message here. Now you don't necessarily see the attachment here because this is in OA. If I sent this to another, let's say an on-premise Exchange deployment, you would see the message, but you'd also see the encrypted attachment, because what happens is this attachment gets open and the header is unencrypted. That's where we're seeing all this HTML information here that does the display, but the content is actually encrypted, and we can only get to the content by validating who we are, right? So if I click read a message here, it should come up with a screen that's going to have me enter or request a one-time password. This can take a moment because it is actually opening in a secure portal for this to go through. Okay, so here you'll notice I'm back into outlook.office365.com. This would be where you go regardless. You send it to Gmail, you send it to Yahoo, on an on-premise exchange deployment. When you click the link, it's going to open into the secure portal. This is what keeps it kind of secure. And if anybody else were to get this, because this was sent to this individual here, if she forward this on, they wouldn't be able to read or request this because I wasn't the one that sent them the one-time passcode. When I click this, it's going to go back to the person that I sent the message to. So we should see that pop in here. Here's the one-time code. I can then take that out. Plop that in here and hit continue. It will decrypt the message so that we can read it. So nothing critical in here. But that's how message encryption works. Now, when I want to send this message, when this is on and you have this enabled, there's a few different ways that we can do this. So one is in the email client itself. So if I'm back up here in OA and I create a new message, you may see this encrypt button here. There's also available in the Outlook client. This will be available as well. But when I click this just once, it's encrypted. So that same experience that you just saw when I send that message, whoever I send it to, that's what they're going to see on the end. They're going to get that message template. It's going to say click here to read it and then ask me to authenticate again, either with the one-time password or through a federated login. But this can be changed. So the encrypt is just one of two default configuration items that we have. The other one, if we click in here and say change permissions, you'll notice we get a drop down and there's a do not forward. I have a few others in here because I also have access to Azure Information Protection, which has a few other templates that are published. But the two out of the box are the encrypt and the do not forward. So if I click do not forward, this actually tightens up permissions a little bit more. So if we use this over encrypt, it also means that whoever's on this when I send it out, that's the list, and it's going to be locked down as much as possible through the client, where you can't modify the message, you can't include others, you can't forward it on into another string, and so forth. Now, considerations here are, if somebody really wants to get at the content of the message and you sent that to them, it's going to be hard to stop that because this is in the browser, right? So you can still take a screenshot, you can copy down content and type. Some of those high-level actions are still available, and we can't really obstruct those with that, nor with any other type of product that works this way. So that's important to realize that is a use case. Other things are when you send attachments and things like that, if those aren't encrypted, then it's possible to get at those contents, maybe repackage those up and send those on their way. There is some additional controls in the more advanced security packages around information protection where you can layer that all into your actual documents as well and make sure that follows along with your Office documents regardless of the message transport system. So again, that's Office message encryption. It's one of the entry-level kind of things that we usually turn on. A lot of people get interested in, and that's how it works out of the box when a user controls it. There's one other method that you can do there, and that's as an Exchange admin, you can add it into your transport rules. And we won't spend too much time on that one, but I will show it to you. And that's here. So this is in our Exchange Admin Center. So again, if we're in the admin portal and you're looking through your list, you'll actually open that up and show all your admin centers. You can click on Exchange. It's going to throw you over into this portal here. Under Mail Flow is where we're going to go, and you're going to have the first item up here called Rules. These are your transport rules. These are very powerful in terms of managing your email messages that are going in and out of the system. So here you'll see I already have a rule for message encryption. We're going to open that up, and what this is really going to do, it's going to say, hey, if somebody's located inside the organization, so if mail originates from Office 365 and it's going out to someone well, not if it's going out to somebody external, but if the subject right now includes keywords of protect or encrypt, it's going to automatically trigger that rule. Now, you can change this as well. So I could actually do this for every external message, or I could change this for a domain. If you haven't seen, these transport rules are very powerful in that manner. So I could say, if I have a partner, for instance, especially if you're in finance, you might be sending them an export from one of your card systems, for instance. And if those go out once a month, somebody's generating them and sending them out, you may always have those messages encrypted. I could create a rule specifically here and just say, if the domain includes that organization domain, that we're going to apply the message encryption. We're going to do it at the encrypt level. If I click over here, you'll notice I'll get that same drop down we had before. So I can still use encrypt and do not forward here. And then this down here is where I can actually use this rule with my custom branding as well. So here I'm just using the default configuration. This is here for every message you have. When you actually create a separate template or deploy one, that will be available here, and you could apply that as well. So those are the different methods you can use for enabling the mail encryption, which is, if you're searching for it as well, understand there was a legacy version of this that didn't really have the same user flow, the UI flow. It was a little hard for end users to utilize without some education on the front end. This version of it is just called Office Message Encryption, and that's what you would look for if you're looking for additional information on that. All right, so this one here is a big one. Azure Active Directory security defaults. This was something that Microsoft has been actually playing with in different versions with different ways of putting in place, and they eventually came up with something where it's a one switch enable. And this is available with every subscription, right? So you actually don't need just an E3 here. If you have an F1, an E1, any of the small business SKUs, anything really running that's Azure Active Directory, which is all of the SKUs, will be able to turn this on. But there's some important considerations here. And first, it's what does it actually do? So when I flip this toggle, what it's going to do is implement what are considered a lot of best practices, right? So if you have a user with a privileged role, so they're a global admin, exchange admin, help desk, or any of those privileged roles above a user role, they will be enabled and required to enroll and then triggered for multi-factor authentication prompts from their mobile device, right? Every time they log in. So those roles are privileged because they have additional rights into the tenant and they can do more harm than a normal user. So that's every authentication request that gets triggered there. Additionally, if you are going into the admin portals, so that's actually here on the right, that's going to trigger an MFA request on every request. So those two items there, the privileged roles and then the portals that you're accessing, can trigger it on every request that you go into. And that's important to understand because PowerShell, the CLI, even the Azure Portal, in some cases where a user has to access certain functions, might trigger an MFA prompt with every request. Now, for your general users, they will also be enrolled for MFA. Now, they will not necessarily get triggered for that MFA request every single authentication attempt, but it's based on a number of behavioral analysis signals that Microsoft's interpreting on the back end. So they will actually determine when your users are going to get that MFA request. So you could have a user sitting in the office, they're on the same machine, on the trusted network, always log on the same way. They may get it once and not see it again for 90 days, 120 days. Whereas another user who's frequent from home to work or traveling, they may see it every day, right? They might get it because they're logging in from different locations with different signals. And so they may get prompted every day. The other big one here is blocking legacy authentication. So another best practice here, because legacy authentication is essentially everything that can bypass the rules that are in place that trigger that multi-factor authentication prompt. So typically these are going to be service accounts that are talking to maybe shared mailboxes over IMAP or POP3 kind of thing. Sometimes, printers may have those set up, and Android devices using the native mail, right? So iOS, that native mail actually supports these new authentication methods. It's called modern authentication is how Microsoft refers to it. That's supported natively in the iOS mail app, but not on the Android native apps. So when this is turned on, things like that are actually going to break. All right, so I'm going to flip over real quick and show you where to enable it. Like I said, it's very simple. And we're going to do this from the Azure Portal. So if you work in the Office 365 portal here a lot, you may not venture over into the Azure AD side of things. So the Azure Active Directory instance is really where all of your identity and access objects are stored, right? And they get synced over to all of these other Office 365 products from there. So when you're in here, you don't see it by default. We have to say show all. And you'll see your admin centers down here. So but earlier when we were in Security Center, that's where that's going to take you. Exchange, this would take you to where we had those transport rules earlier. But for us, we need to go to Azure AD, which is right here, Azure Active Directory. If we click that, that's going to open another window and take us in there. I am already here inside of the directory. So when you're in here, you would go under Properties. And this is going to load up the directory properties, and you're going to scroll all the way to the bottom and you're going to see this link here. So unlike most things with these toggles that you see, this doesn't have it readily available. You have to turn this on here where it says manage security defaults, and then you'll click yes, and then you're going to save it. So I'm actually not going to do it on this tenant because my test tenant, it's going to force this account to enroll, and it's going to block access since I can't enroll it into the MFA app at this time. But once I click this, every time the next users log in, they're going to be requested. You're going to get a pop-up, and it's going to say your administrators would like more information from you, and they need to input or run through the process of onboarding their mobile app. So that's another good consideration here is because of this entry-level version of the security controls here, and we're going to look at the more advanced ones, it does work explicitly with the Microsoft app. So if you're used to like SMS codes and things like that, that's not available at this level. The users will have an authentication app that they onboard onto their device, and then they can use the rolling tokens, the codes, if you're used to those one-time passwords, or the push notifications from the app themselves. And you'll notice I don't have any other options here, right? It's just on or off, and that's it. So when we're in here, and you have block legacy authentication, and you know Android users are going to get hit, there's no way to exclude those users. We can't exclude those apps, right? We can't make exceptions for admin accounts. That's all done in the next tier, which is called conditional access, which we'll speak to, but you can't modify that here with the security defaults. So that's a very important consideration. So for Android users, you have to plan ahead. You want to roll them into like the Outlook mobile app and make sure they're over there because that does support the authentication that's needed here. If you have other services that are using shared mailboxes, you might want to look like how that can be modified, what that supports, if that's something that needs extra work or attention to make, to keep that from breaking, that will be important. And that could impact your ability to enable the security defaults. So now with that being said, if you find yourself in that situation, there are some workarounds, right? So one is we can move away from this and use kind of two other controls. So for multi-factor authentication, you can go to what's called a per user enablement. This is really references the legacy MFA model now, as Microsoft would prefer you either enabling it here with security defaults or we're going into conditional access. But it's still available. So we can turn that on a per user basis. It just means that every time we onboard a user, we actually have to turn them on and enable that user for MFA, or they're going to get left out of those prompts. And you wouldn't want that because that's a gap in your security. And it's also prompted really based on every authentication. As far as you'll authenticate, you're going to get your token. It will have a lifetime. And when the lifetime expires, you're going to get that MFA again, regardless of the app that you're accessing, whether it's the portal, Windows, Word, in PowerPoint, right, and so forth, you're going to get that. That's why it's called per user. It's done on per user, not based on an app, a location, or anything else. So the other thing with the legacy authentication is this blocks it very easily here at the admin portal. But before we had this, we were able to do it on Exchange Online. And really, that's the big one. That's the one that's going to expose you the most, like I said, with the IMAP and the POP3s type of legacy authentications that will bypass the modern. You can still do that in Exchange Online. It takes a little more effort and control over that, like disabling some protocols and then changing how the authentication works on the Exchange Online side. So for those situations where you absolutely can't just turn this on, but you still want to benefit from the best practices and the controls, we have a couple of options there that we can drop down to. Okay, so now when we add in EMS, which is the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, to a SKU, we get a lot of options there, right? So the Office 365 E3 plus EMS E3 is really the next one up that we see a lot of. That's also very similar in these other items that you see above. The Microsoft 365 F3 SKU contains EMS. The E3 Microsoft 365 E3 contains both the E3 and the EMS E3 suites, and the Microsoft 365 Business Premium, right, for users that have maybe 300 users and below, that also contains access to these controls. And if you pair EMS up with other subscriptions, so even if it's like an E1 with the EMS E3, you'll also be able to take advantage of what we're going to talk about here. So the same things we were doing with the security defaults really applies here, but we get more control. Now we have granular access over what's called conditional access apps, access policies, right? So these policies are going to be defined that say what happens when a user comes in, how do we figure out if a user falls under that policy, and then what's going to be required for them to either get access or potentially be blocked from access. We can get other signals now at this point, right? With EMS, we not only get access to these conditional access rules, we're going to get access to Microsoft Intune for, mobile device management if we wanted to roll that out. But what we're going to talk about today on that side of it is mobile application management. So this is where you don't have to take control of the full device. It doesn't have to be enrolled. And in fact, if it's already enrolled in another MDM like MAS 360 or AirWatch, we can still apply these rules. And that leads into how we handle and restrict the apps on those devices. And as well as how do we have more control over the desktop experience, right? Because sometimes we want to enable the full experience. You saw a lot of what Matt did with Teams. He was in Teams, we were co-authoring, he was running sync to his libraries. That was coming down locally to the desktop. You may not want that everywhere, right? You might want it only on a machine that you control, but if I go home and access it, you don't want me to do that. And I've seen scenarios where maybe we want to block that, but most of the time we don't want to stop productivity. But we do want to limit exposure. So I'll talk a little bit how we can do that with these controls as well. So these are the scenarios that we'll look at, right? So we want to block legacy authentication just like we did before. We're going to restrict access from mobile devices. And we are going to talk about restricting access for non-managed devices, really focusing around the Mac OS and the Windows desktop. But we do still want to allow full access to our managed devices. And then when they're off network, of course, we want to require MFA on everything, right? Because you're no longer on a trusted network. We want to make sure those signals go across and that the MFA signal gets deployed. Okay, so here we are back inside of Azure Active Directory. I'm actually going to back up a little bit and just show you how we get in here. When we're in Azure Active Directory side of things, we're going to scroll down on this blade on the left. We're going to go into security, and then we're going to find our conditional access policies on top. Now, if you see these baseline policies up here, do not use these. These are going away, right? So before the security defaults were an option, this is what Microsoft put in place. But these have been deprecated. They are here only in certain legacy tenants, and they are being removed. So you definitely don't want to enable those. Now, I have a set of rules in here already, and you will see that we have a block access from apps on unmanaged devices. This is the app enforced restrictions for browser access. These two work together. So what this is going to do is this is going to essentially block all native access from our local devices. If I'm on Windows and I'm at home and I open up Word and I try to connect online, it's not going to let me, right? I can't sync OneDrive or use any of my native apps that way. I can only go in and I can only use it to access from a browser. This rule is what's actually going to allow that, but we've added some other restrictions on that. So beyond getting in there in the browser, if I go to it, we're also going to restrict what you can do in the browser. So I'm going to let you work online, but I'm not going to let you download anything. Right here, management access for MFA. This is really just going into when we talk about Azure Portal, the Power CLI, and the things we talked about in the security defaults. That is enabled here. That triggers it if anybody's accessing those portals. We have a block legacy authentication rule that does the same thing. Again, we block legacy authentication. The power behind these rules is we can add exceptions, and when I dive into the rule details, you'll see how we can do that. This is enforcing our MFA requests when we're not on the corporate network. And then the last one we have is we're going to work with Intune as far as restricting the apps and what they can do on the device. So the big ones in here are these two. So these work in combination with settings that you have to set up in SharePoint Online and Microsoft Exchange. So on the Exchange side of things, there's a PowerShell setting you have to go in. You must set up your OA mailbox policies to enable conditional access. It's a single line of PowerShell you run. It's just set-OA mailbox policy -conditional access, and then the attribute you're going to say is read only. Now, I'm going to show you what it looks like on the SharePoint side of things. Let's go in. We're going to go back into the admin center. And it's usually easier with these two rules to start, enable it with Exchange. Nothing happens until we put the conditional access rules in place. So when you turn this on, this capability is there, but nothing is actually triggered yet. But then come back into SharePoint. And the reason I say that is because they built a function into SharePoint that when I turn this on, it actually creates the rules by default. And something you'll need to be cognizant of is when it does that, it not only sets the rules by default, it assigns it to everyone and makes them enabled by default. So if you're not ready to roll out the service, I would recommend definitely do this either after hours or have both portals up so that when the rules are created, you can drop over and change the assignment so that it's not affecting users. So let's go over to SharePoint. So under policies, we're going to go to access control, and under unmanaged devices here, we're going to get this pop up. Right now, you can see that I've already enabled it. We're allowing limited web-only access. And again, this by itself doesn't do anything. You need the conditional access policy paired with it for it to work for users. But I can also block access. So when I do this, if I'm on an unmanaged device, you'll see how the rule is set up, and it comes over and checks this. It will actually block access to SharePoint completely and wouldn't allow access from the unmanaged device. This is the default, allow full access from everything. So mobile apps or anything, that's if you don't set up this rule, that's how it's always is, same with Exchange. So when you come in and click this, again, it's going to save it and drop on over. It's going to create those two rules for you. So first one we're going to go into, I'm going to walk you through some of the changes that you'll have to make on this rule so that it also applies to SharePoint or Exchange, because when SharePoint creates it, it's going to target to SharePoint only, but we want to include Exchange under that. So here we can set up in our rule, who is it going to apply to? In this case, it's all users. Now, where we had security defaults, we couldn't dial this in, right? We were stuck with what it offered us. When we're creating these specific rules, notice we now have an exclude. So in here, I've already excluded my administrator to be sure that I always have access and I'm not going to get locked out of my demo environment here. When you're building conditional access rules, however, you can use the exclude for troubleshooting. Certainly, report only works for that now. It's a fairly new options that we've had in conditional access. But it is important when you're locking things down, when you're like all users, all access, all apps, that you have what's called maybe a break glass account. So that is a privileged account that's going to be excluded from your conditional access rules, and you should monitor for access for that because it really should not be used for any type of administration. It's there only in the event that you can't get into the portal any other way. So have a complex password, put that out in a vault somewhere, and make sure that audit logs are not showing anything happening with that account. If you see people using that account, then of course you want to investigate, find out what's happening, rotate the password, and keep that secure.
Hey, Jesus.
Yeah.
Juanita asked, does the same happen for other applications or just SharePoint?
So in this case, because we're locking down SharePoint and Exchange, and those are the underlying apps that really feed most of the systems, they are going to affect other apps. So Teams, for instance, because we're locking down file access for attachments and making that browser only, if you access Teams, whether through the client, because Teams on the desktop is a browser app, it's just repackaged, or from the browser, you also will not be able to download attachments from Teams. So anything with those file repositories, between SharePoint and OneDrive are going to be materially affected, and essentially that's all the services that share files. So it's a pretty powerful control. All right, I'm gonna walk back here so you can see here the options we have on the conditional access. We won't go through this detail on every other rule, but this will let you see some of the flexibility we have. So beyond all users, we can also target here. You'll notice we have one for all guests and external users, and we can also assign based on roles. This would be privileged roles that are already assigned in the system, or specific users and groups that we set up. You can definitely use this when you're piloting out the rules, or if you have different standards for different groups. The next section is when we call Cloud Apps and Actions. This is the one that you'll definitely have to change on the default rule that gets created. This will target SharePoint. I'm going to bring this up, and it will have this one right here by default. Now, they have one for SharePoint Online. They also have one in here for Exchange Online. However, they are moving away from those and more into this one right here, this Office 365 preview. And this because it does target other applications. And generally speaking, when you have these rules, you want that because there's a lot of interdependencies across the services when you're using Office 365. So it's usually safer to select the Office 365 item here. And make sure that we're capturing everything. The alternative before this was available is I would come in and add Exchange explicitly. But in this case, what I did is I removed SharePoint and I added Office 365 to make sure that we have that coverage. So next up, you get a suite of conditions. Now, I will tell you, user risk here, this is an elevated license level. Not everybody will see this. If you're on the EMS E3, you will not. This shows up on the E5. So it's tied to Azure Active Directory, the Premium 2 SKU. But these other ones will, this one in sign-in risks will be on the elevated SKU. Device platforms, locations, client apps, and device states, you can use as those conditions to define who's going to fall under the rule. So when you're thinking about that, think about we had the users. If we select all users, when you first log in, you're going to fall into that group because you're all, you're one of the all users. The next thing we're going to look at is how much of these do we fall into. We can narrow it down and we can look for signals like what platform you're coming into. So I could set up specifically for Android, right? And now if I'm on an Android, that's going to be true. This rule will apply to me. If I'm on an iOS, that'll be false. This rule will no longer apply to me. So that's how those work. Same things we can do includes and excludes here. Locations, we can set up locations. So you'll see later where I have an include and exclude to make that work so that we are basically don't get prompted on the network that we know, and we do get prompted on the networks we don't know. Client apps, this one is probably the most detailed of them all, but understand that when I say mobile apps and desktop clients, that's all like the native Microsoft apps that are on mobile, or your Office clients that you've installed locally on your desktop are going to fall under that. Browser is just that if I'm accessing through the browser. And then we have the legacy authentication clients. You'll see this used when I'm blocking legacy authentication later. But you can get these signals through your authentication scheme, right? So when I log into Office from my browser, it actually knows I'm logging in from the browser. And if I go from the app, it'll say like the Outlook Mail app, for instance, in your audit logs. The last one is device state. This is really if the device is managed or what's called hybrid AD join. If you're not familiar with those terms, hybrid AD join is when you have a domain machine, like a traditional machine's joined to Active Directory domain that's also registered itself in Azure AD, which basically means that it's accessed an Office 365 application. So at that point, it will be labeled a hybrid device, right? So we just got a signal and we know that it's domain joined. Now, we don't know anything else about it, right? We can't determine its compliance with GPOs and so forth. We just know that you're managing it another way and it's domain joined. Now, when we talk about a managed machine, that's in the context of Microsoft Intune. What it means is you've enrolled Windows 10 or your Mac OS or your mobile device into the MDM portion of Intune. right? So you've actually opted in, you're getting your policies from Intune, it's reporting on compliance status. So what this signal does is it basically just is going to say this is only going to apply to a hybrid machine or a managed machine. It's not actually looking at your specific state at this point. That's why you see all device states. It's just saying, are you managed in some way or other, right? So I could have a rule targeted at my managed machines and then use another rule, say, for unmanaged machines using this signal. Okay, so once you have your conditions set on what's going to trigger the rule, then you can set up how you're going to allow access. In the case of this rule, right, we're going in, we're targeting it, we're saying, are you using a native app? It's got to be a desktop app. Remember, we had that in our app controls, or a mobile app. And, you know, are you in the user group that's covered? It's all users, you should be. So those are going to evaluate to true. And in this case, once it evaluates to true, it's going to be like, what else is required to get access? So here, I have those same two terms we talked about, managed or a compliant managed device, and then we have a hybrid Azure AD device. So if your machine is domain managed as a hybrid device and it's active in the system, it will pass this control and it will be allowed to pass and get access. Now, if it's not, it would then have to be registered and managed by Intune as well as compliant. So if you have an Intune machine that's not compliant with the policy, this would be false, and we would not allow you to pass this rule. You would fail this rule and not be granted access. If you pass one of these two, you're going to get access. This is what allows a machine that is managed to get full access into all of our systems from their desktop clients. So that's all there is to that guy. Now, the other one is, what about our unmanaged, or I'm sorry, this is labeled block access from unmanaged devices, but the reason is the rule is kind of opposite. We're granting access to only those devices we manage. Everything unmanaged is going to be blocked from that native access. So here, we want to have enforced restrictions from the browser. So at this point, again, we're going to target all users again. Client apps, you'll notice I'm still targeting Office 365. So it's just looking to see, are we logging into any of the client services? That's going to trigger it. And we do change this up a bit. Remember the last one, we were targeting mobile apps and desktop apps. Here, we're targeting the browser. So at this point, if you're on an unmanaged device, you would have failed the other rule. So you can't access it from your desktop clients. You're going to be blocked. However, I didn't have browser in that rule specifically, so we didn't block browser access. So now when you access it, you're going to go through the browser. You're going to get caught under this rule. And in this case, we don't have a grant. We haven't set up anything in there that you have to pass once you have this rule, but we are going to pass this control along to what we set up with the Sharepoint and Exchange, right? So once we turn those conditional access policies on, we'll be able to come in here, click this, say use app enforced restrictions, and it's going to look at that setting that we just set up in Sharepoint or on Exchange Online, right? We set that up for read-only access in the browser. So this is what's going to restrict that in the session. So very important there. These other ones can define other session-based controls in here. Your sign-in frequency, how frequently you're popped up for authentication and MFA. You can control that here if you want to disable persistent browsers. Everybody has access to that. This one, however, is actually tied to another service called Cloud Access Security. So Microsoft Cloud Access Security, that comes in the EMS E5 SKUs, or it can be bought standalone, but it extends out the control. What we're doing here with the browser restrictions and controls there, you can actually do this on a more granular basis, per app, per document kind of thing, and it acts on signals on the fly. Like if there's DLP rules and sensitivity labels attached, it will then encrypt and put controls on a document on the fly. So it's a very powerful tool, but it is in the higher level SKUs. It's not available in the EMS E3s. Okay, let's walk through a few others, and I'll show you that browser experience. So management access to require MFA. Again, in this case, I've only included specific users, and that was because I was testing this actually with my account there. But if I wanted to, I could still assign it to all users. But the app here is different. I have Microsoft Azure Management. That means when I go any access to portal.azure, accessing the PowerShell CLI or the PowerShell modules for interacting with Azure, any of Azure services really, and Azure AD, this is going to get triggered. So that's what that covers. Otherwise, there's no real way to cover kind of the PowerShell access, the CLI access. I'm going to call out some things that can get complicated here, because things like Exchange, for instance, have their own instance of a PowerShell module. Those talk to APIs that don't necessarily go through these same control endpoints, and they are going to be governed under rules that are applied to Exchange, not necessarily to the management portal. So same thing with the SharePoint Online if you're using those specific commandlets and teams as well. Here's our legacy authentication where we had before. Now, previously with security defaults, it's on or it's off. We have no control, but here we actually can exclude groups. So in this case, we might want to apply it by default for all users, but we want to come in and exclude those accounts that we have. So, you know, if you have CRM accounts, they're talking IMAP or something that you need to exclude, we can then do that here and select those users. So we definitely have more control over that. In this case, I don't have any exclusions, but I am including it. We're covering all cloud apps, which is basically any access to the service. And we are really only looking at this case at the legacy client authentication. So any type of authentication attempt that doesn't support our modern authentication or MFAs, that's going to get caught up in here. And then we're actually going to block that outright.
Hey, Jesus, another question from Juanita. Do you advise to complete the Intune setup prior to setting up conditional access rules?
If you're going to use things like required apps or requiring the management of the device, then I would say yes. You can take advantage with domain machines. It's just starting out with the hybrid. And actually, a lot of people do that. We set it up for hybrid because they're not enrolled in Intune yet. And then that'll get the browser-only access. And I'm going to jump in. The app side of it for the mobile apps is pretty simple to set up in Intune. I usually do recommend getting that started with the app restrictions, which is really what this last one is. So this one, MFA enforced off corporate network, is we're going to use a lot of the same signals again, but in this case, we're going to use the location signal. Now notice for this case, I want to include all locations by default in this rule. I want everybody to trigger this rule, and I only want to exclude my trusted IPs. So in this case, I have MFA trusted IPs. I can preload those IPs. Those are external IPs from locations that you own that can be detected on the Azure side, and those would not fall under this rule. You can also create these up. It doesn't have to be one lump location. So I can create different offices and put my IPs there and have different rules for different offices. But that's how I would do a location-based restriction. That rule will essentially mean if I'm not coming from one of those IPs, I'm going to get an MFA prompt when I'm triggered. And the last one, and yes, we know about this one. I'm going to turn this off to get that out, is for restricting mobile apps. This one does tie into Intune, and we set up some app restriction rules on our mobile devices. And we'll look at those rules real quick. It won't take long to go through those, but we can say on a mobile app running Outlook mobile and OneDrive mobile, we can say attachments can only be saved to OneDrive mobile, not to the local device. In this case, we don't own the device. We're not managing the device, or maybe another MDM provider is, but we want to keep everything in those apps, right? So we can control what happens when they sign in from those apps. The only thing is we can't force them to use the app. We don't control the device. That's where conditional access comes in, because here, we can use, we can tie to our device platforms 1, but we can also set up a grant control that looks for how we're coming in. And we can say require an approved client app. These approved apps, if you click this link, Microsoft will show you the link. It's essentially all of the Microsoft apps. Really means that anything else is going to be rejected. So think about that Android scenario that I talked about. If I'm on Android and I might be running something other than the Outlook app, which is the approved app, I'm going to get blocked. And what's nice about the rule tool, when you do block and you do this in line with Intune, it will walk the user through. They do get it. It uses the Exchange quarantine functions. You get an email that says, hey, we require controlled access to this device. Please download the Outlook client, and it will onboard them into getting that out there, right, and enrolling that on their device. So those are all the conditional access rules. And it's a lot, but they're not too difficult to get through. I do recommend try and keep them concise as much as possible. You will see when we have off, they can be off. They're not going to do anything. They won't trigger. You can't report on them. On is they're active, working how you would expect or hopefully expect. Report only is just that. When they're report only, you can go into the sign-in logs and you can look at the conditional access and see what's happening there. So back up to that just a little bit, and we'll look at sign-ins. And I'll show you one. When you go in here, you'll see a conditional access panel, and you can see what's happening in here, right? Whether we get success or it's skipping it, if there's failures, and this can be used to troubleshoot it as well. Okay. Let's go back here and look at where that is. So right now, this account is signed in. It's under, let's get rid of that. It's under these restrictions that we have in place. So my machine's not enrolled into this tenant. It's not managed by the tenant. So I'm going to go down. I'm going to find what we have here, an attachment, right? So right here, I have an attachment, but notice this message up here. I can't download or print it. And if I come here, I no longer have the download options, right? So that's what's happening when we're blocking unmanaged machines. I can still work. I can still get in here. I can still be productive. I can still see the PowerPoint. I can still get to the previews. I can even edit these online, but I can't download it. I can't open it up in my desktop PowerPoint client. I can't, get to it from anything that's going to cache it locally. It's stuck in my browser at this point. Same thing if we bounce over. And I open, actually, do I already have it? Yeah, that's my encrypted, my OneDrive. So if I drop in here, notice up in the bar, I don't have all those things that like Matt was showing in Teams. I can't sync or download. Those are all trimmed out of the UI. They're not available. I can work in here, but I can't do anything with it. If I drop in here, I have no download options here as well, right? Those are all restricted. And when you go into Teams, it's a little bit different because you don't have the UI trimmed, but what will happen there is if you click on a file, try to download, it'll actually just say error and it won't let you download that file from Teams either. So it's pretty powerful. Most of the time you would need more either additional security controls or extra parties involved in here to get to that level of control. So it's nice that they enabled that we can get it with the base security package without needing MCAS. So if I had MCAS, I wouldn't need those two rules. I could do it more on demand, like based on document contents within the session. And there's definitely some advanced scenarios where you can integrate that with things that you federated with single sign-on. They work with third-party apps as well as far as protecting documents. Okay, so the Intune side of that now. Intune is, where do I have it up here? Over here. Intune can do two different things. As I stated earlier, you can do MDM, where you control the entire device, but it can also do app management. Now, that app management happens on mobile devices, so we're talking iOS and Android type of level policies here. And you'll notice this looks like the Azure Portal, but it's a little bit different. I have this endpoint.microsoft.com. That's where they're integrating all of the endpoint management services. So this has to do with them simplifying it between their Intune management, their cloud access tool, as well as what was a System Center Configuration Manager, SCCM, which is now rebranded Endpoint Configuration Manager. They brought those two together. This is kind of a unified portal that they're working to bring this all together. What we're going to go into is apps here. That's going to be this blade. And we're going to scroll down to app protection policies. And I'm going to go in here, data restrictions for apps, and I'm going to show you what we set up here real quick. So in this policy, you can assign it to all of your users, and it's really only going to affect when they get on to the service and they're signing in from a covered application, right? So you can see there's a list of applications that are covered. There's a few that support Intune that are not Microsoft, but for the most part, these are going to be Microsoft apps. And in this case, usually the big use case is OneDrive and email, right, through the Outlook app. Those are in here as well. So we're going to restrict access for these guys and control what's going to happen. And these are the signals that we're going to accept. If we go to our policies, here we go. I'm going to open this up. In this case, in this policy that's assigned, we're not allowing anybody to back it up. iOS has a lot of the same policies. They're not one for one because of the platforms, but they're very close. So in this case, Android backup, like backing up the Google backup to the cloud, we've disabled that. We don't want to take our organizational data and have that backed up. Now, sending org data to other apps, and this is going out. So, and remember that list of apps that I had in there? If we're in Outlook, we don't want you to take a message and copy things out or attachments or anything like that, and then push that into another app. You don't want to move that into the Google Drive on the Android or so forth. So in this case, I have this selected. I have no apps exempted. This could be important if you need to pass something in. Before on Androids, it was like a voicemail thing. We'd get a voicemail, it couldn't play natively, and you'd have to pass that out into another app. And when these rules first came out, you couldn't do that, so I ended up blocking it. But this lets you exempt those apps that you can share data with if they're not falling under, if we can't see signals from them. So by default, it's going to be allows you to save it everywhere. You have to set block. Once you set block, this is going to light up, and now we can change this. Right? Notice local storage is no longer here. We just got Sharepoint and OneDrive. That means that's the only two places I can save data are those two apps. In this case, this is a new option, but if I'm in Outlook and I hit a dial button, it will go out to the default dialer. You could actually restrict that as well. This one is almost the opposite of this one. That captures data going out. This one captures data going in. Typically, it's okay. It's like if we have a personal app, we want to bring data in, that's okay. It's just not going back out. So that's why this is a typical setting, have that on all app. Restrict, cut, copy, and paste. So this is a complement to our hard data. In this case, if we're in Outlook or OneDrive, we're in a document or the Word app, right? Mobile, maybe we cut something there. If we cut it in Word, we want to paste it in Excel, that's going to work because those are going to be managed apps. But if we drop over to Google and paste into Gmail, that's not going to work. It's just basically, it's going to change the clipboard contents and it's going to say your organization protects this data, you can't paste it here. Keyboards, this is Android specific. Again, if you want to have approved keyboard list, there's a default list. Swift is, Microsoft bought Swift, some of the defaults that Google and Samsung have. You could add them in there if you have the IDs from the machines, or you can not worry about it. This one, encrypt work data, it's another important one. This is important because it encrypts it at the app layer, right? So not at the device. I know iOS has encryption by default. Not all Androids do. So you can tell it, regardless of the setting on the device, because remember, we're not managing the device, so we don't get that signal, that we're going to encrypt all our data at the app layer, right? So regardless. And down here, sync app with native contacts. That's really around Outlook. Can I sync my contacts to the native apps? If you're allowing pass through the dialer, then this is probably what you want because most people are used to using contacts from their phone. But you can restrict that as well. You can also restrict things that print. And we can restrict which browsers that we can share with. So in Outlook Mobile, I get a link. I click it. By default, it's going to open up whatever the default browser is on Android. And that would be Chrome browser. And we don't control that, but maybe it's going to be information that we want to hold back or not allow in that, or we want to parse. We can run that through Microsoft Edge, which is a controlled browser app, right? So Intune can be aware of what's happening with Microsoft Edge. And org notifications, these are like the pop-ups and things like that the apps provide. You can also restrict that so that email notifications that don't show up on the device. And I just can't say it enough that these are for the app, not the device, right? None of this happens on the device until the user goes into the application, opens it up, and signs in. So this is also why we need this paired with our conditional access rule, because there's nothing saying that they can't open another app. There are plenty of third-party apps that support Microsoft's modern authentication scheme. So as long as it supports that, right, we can use another mail app, for instance, and get into our mail, and we can use that, even though it's not an approved app, because it supports the modern authentication. So that's why we block it, and we use that grant that says only approved apps. Now, if they try to do it, they're going to get blocked because it's the wrong app that's trying to access data. But together, this lets you take a vast amount of control over devices that you don't manage, right? So for desktops, you can still work. You haven't inhibited anybody from using that machine because they can still work on their browser or grab a work machine and get full access. And if they're on mobile, they can put it on their personal mobile because we're restricting that content within those apps that we have control over. And again, you don't have to deploy the apps. They can download them directly from the store. All of these rules get triggered the first time they sign into the tenant. It's going to say, hey, this app is covered by this rule. And now you're gonna follow that. Those are going to be applied. They have to opt into it. Once they do, it's there. If they opt out, nothing happens. They get no data. Okay, so that was a lot. I know we covered a lot, but those are kind of the entry level settings that we initially first come in and set up. Now, the one you'll notice I didn't talk about here was what Matt covered a little bit, and that was around sharing. And that's because this one, there's not really a well-defined policy that works on every organization. It's very, very dependent on every organization and their own tolerance for sharing. So we have some that lock it all the way down and they don't have guest sharing. They've never had guest sharing. They have different controls for external access. It's well-defined, policies are in place, users know what to do. We have others who think they have controlled sharing, and we usually go through a process to define what that actually is, but this came up to, I think, a question we had around shadow IT and where that is. So that was like the network shared example. A lot of times they're network shared. You're like, well, you can only access it when you're on the VPN, but people want to share that out. They're usually sharing it out, right? It's either going in email and it's being sent and you lose control of it that way, or they have a personal Dropbox or something that they're getting it and then they're sharing it out through there, and you're kind of losing sight of that. So there is room there for having more liberal sharing controls in your tenant because you have additional visibility now, right? So instead of them using a personal Dropbox and you have zero visibility, you can have sharing in OneDrive and they can still share it just as easily as they can in Dropbox, but now you know that it's shared and you can track that, right? Additionally, with anonymous links, that's another one that comes up. OneDrive does support those. You can set up some default policies around there saying it's only going to last for 3 days, and it's, you can put restrictions around that. And you can run reports on which content has the anonymous links on there. Again, that's up for interpretation depending on the org-wide controls and requirements. But if you know people are doing that already, and you try to lock that down because you were already locked down, then really all you're doing is kind of staying blind to the issue. Whereas maybe as an intern, you bring them into OneDrive, you enable that anonymous and then slowly roll it back and start implementing your policies on how content is shared externally. So that one, there's a lot of deep diving that goes into those conversations, and it's definitely why I didn't go into saying, hey, set this as a best practice or a policy that we see all the time. So as you can see here, there is a lot that does with security, right? The advanced security stuff, we didn't go into any of that. That's going to be more in the EMS E5 packages and the add-ons and some of the specialty SKUs. All the productivity suite items, they actually have their individual security controls that you can label. And a lot of what we talked about in the core was down here in the bottom. What I've highlighted here are kind of the areas that we talked about today. You can see there's so much more that we did not even touch in or get into. Even within these core suites, we just hit the tip of the iceberg on the amount of controls and things that you can enable in here. And I'll leave you with one last thing to know, that I'm a big fan of all the controls. I think there's a lot of value packed into these controls, but we also understand that a lot of organizations may already have other things in its place. So most of the time, you can use a combination of these controls with your existing features that are already in place, right? So you might not be ready to turn on Office message encryption internally because you have Zix already. When you're making that move, you can still continue to use Zix, and you can continue to use Zix forever for that if you wanted to, or maybe you want to, pull back on costs because it's not doing anything else other than encrypting mail. It also gives you an avenue to eventually get rid of Zix when contracts are up and support's up and those type of things. Then you can roll back to that exchange message encryption. Same thing with any of these other controls. If you're running, AirWatch, take advantage of the MAM like I just saw you. We can still use that, and so forth. So lots of variability, lots of stackability in there that you can use regardless of what you currently have in place today. All right, so guys, with that is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to hand this back over to Jason.
Thanks, Jesus. Really appreciate it. Good, great detail. And again, appreciate the continued engagement from the audience between the kind of private messages as well as the ones we published, as well as the ones we showed outright. Let me get my camera going here. Hopefully you guys can see my content. So we're going to start to try to land this plane a little bit. As I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's really, really important from what we do at eGroup that we not only kind of paint the picture of what's possible, but we also go deep. And as Jesus shows, there's a lot of things you can do with the native tools within the Microsoft 365 stack with security alone. And that's not even, touching the iceberg of some of the advanced security and what we can do with third-party applications and integrations. I think some of the questions that were being asked were leading there. but also the possibilities for productivity between, some of the things of integrating third-party apps and taking your normal business processes and bringing them into the systems to help drive further adoption and more efficiencies. So what I would like to do to kind of wrap up here and get you out on time is to really talk about remote work. I think it's still a very important topic for a lot of us, especially as we're seeing remote schools and things like that start up and seeing that there are frustrations with the learning curve still happening. But really taking remote work and understanding that it's becoming the new normal, and lots of organizations that we're working with are preparing for remote work to be a persistent thing and starting to see the benefits of doing it. Even where organizations like us at eGroup, we've been remote for many years. Either out and about with great clients like yourself, or working from home on projects heads down, or being lightly in the office. So how can you be effective with some of that stuff in even normal operations? I'm going to touch on some success stories lightly. It's not so much bragging about the success, it's just telling you what others have done and the results that they've gotten out of it. And then following that, I'm going to hit on next steps, and then we'll allow Carly to come in and wrap us up. All right, so getting started. Get focused here. Here we go. So what do we mean by successful remote work? I mean, I think in a lot of ways it's obvious, but we want to create some definition for it. So when we talk about it, we're really talking about ensuring that your end users are productive, ensuring that they have intuitive tools, ensuring that security is still at the forefront of everything we're talking about, even understanding that not necessarily just with remote work, but with the progress of cloud identity, as Jesus has been talking about, has moved outside the firewalls, and is how do you address concerns like that as part of your strategy going forward so that you can enable remote work. And what I've seen is that the businesses are thriving were the ones that were prepared to meet both of these objectives going back to March as kind of their normal business operation, and those that kind of quickly were able to pivot to these because this was already things on their roadmaps. So sharing some of those stories, probably one of my favorite ones, and this is one that we're going to have an upcoming webinar series where we're going to deep dive with the CIO of this organization on his strategy, where eGroup was involved, and what did we mean by trading servers for services. It's something that he and I had talked about earlier on, kind of coming up with the ideas and really building the drumbeat of what we wanted the organization to be as he took over the CIO role and was cleaning up a mess. What we were talking about was, in any situation, the way he would summarize it is that they had services that IT delivered to the end users as well as their clients. And I don't think that's different from most organizations, but what was more different was how he encapsulated it into two things. We're going to trade servers for services wherever we can, meaning even if we have servers in our organization, we're providing SaaS-based or SaaS-like services to our organization, to clients or customers. And in the case of where we can go SaaS and we can buy a service as opposed to building servers to support a service, we're going to do that. And then he also said every decision we're going to make is going to be governed by the simplicity of it, the security of it, and the scalability of it. As an international global organization that struggled with visibility, working on 4 different continents, they had a lot of trouble with that, and they had a lot of trouble with downtime due to complexity. So I'll tell a little bit more about that one. A little bit more simple of a use case was another organization that we worked with that was kind of adjacent to the financial services industry, and COVID hit them hard. All of a sudden, they were acquiring another organization kind of before it hit. So they found themselves in the midst of acquiring an organization that they couldn't really get face-to-face with the end users to help them out with. They were a global presence as well, primarily in the US with some offices in Europe. And they found that even getting basic services like voice with their on-premises infrastructure set up for the new users, but bringing everybody together was a challenge. So we're going to talk a little bit about how Teams Voice enabled them to be successful and be successful quickly, better than they ever were in the past. And then lastly, one that's loosely associated with modern workplace, but probably fits more into tomorrow's conversation when we're talking about Azure solutions in the same format, is how another organization used virtual desktops to allow vendors, critical vendors that were supporting doing things like managed services, things like day-to-day administration of their servers, as well as their own end users, to be able to access critical resources in a financial industry. And this is also very similar to a healthcare industry where we've got similar success stories where you have legacy apps. They are applications that don't work well remotely and have high security requirements, whether it's patient information, whether it's PCI compliance, whether it's PII information from a banking standpoint. How were they able to provide those end users those applications quickly at home without a lot of complexity? So really fast, let's go through this in the next, let's spend about maybe 3 or 4 minutes with each. And feel free to ask questions, feel free to follow up with questions. I'm happy to kind of, if your question at the end of this is, well, tell me more about how they did this, we'll declare that as success. So when we talk about transitioning services, as I mentioned, this organization defined everything as a service, what they delivered to their clients. So things like Microsoft 365 was a service, that was their collaboration services. Things like Dynamics, that was a service for business processing. They had other services like they were in the nonprofit industry, so they had things like their fundraising and web application services. They also had things like Wi-Fi, so even outside the Microsoft suite. So when they defined these 6 core services, and they needed to deliver it to 4 continents, and in some places as a nonprofit, they were delivering it to users that had less than ideal bandwidth and internet connectivity in a lot of places. They were all doing this from a single data center in Virginia that originally inherited 118 servers, virtual machines, physical machines, and different types of server workloads to support just those 6 services. They were a 24/7 operation. Their infrastructure was aging. It was also kind of a mixed bag of different things. Core networking didn't match storage, didn't match servers, didn't match edge networking. So, and in some cases, they had multiple solutions for the same problem, which created complexity. There was capital costs were building to keep that aging infrastructure refreshed, replaced, powered on, supported. And downtime was common. They actually, in the first month of taking over this organization and working with them, they measured 6.5 outages a month for the first 3 months and averaged around 6 per year, slightly over 6 per month for maybe the first 6 months that they were there, as things were having changes getting this plan off the ground. So when they talked about services, they said, okay, we're having a lot of downtime, phone systems, network outages, rogue IT, shadow IT, or remote offices, finding things like, offices that were outside of their reach, were swapping out the corporate network gear for, commercial grade, or residential grade network gear to circumvent IT policies and restrictions. They were battling with a lot of that. The first thing that they wanted to do was get collaboration on the same page. So taking a lot of the systems like, link servers that became Skype for Business, that became Teams online, taking those things and moving those services forward into the services world, they were able to do so quickly within months and start to gain the interest and excitement of their end users. They were also able to do things like adopt Teams calling plans, and when they were talking about Teams, they were using Skype at first, and when Teams rolled out, they were able to do that as well, but connect that into their third-party systems, into their hosted systems, so that when someone's on a Teams call like this, I can receive calls with my corporate phone number, I can make calls from my corporate phone number, I can do all these different things within the same client, which continued to drive users into the ecosystem. So that they said, wow, this is more than just a chat and document sharing tool. This is actually where I start to do my work, which inherently kind of starts to pull things out of email. They started centralizing things on OneDrive, got to get rid of a lot of file servers. Some of them that after the fact were discovered that had latent ransomware on there. Thankfully, knock on wood, that they never got, that time bomb never went off, but was able to find a lot of risk there after the fact from those file servers that they were able to mitigate by moving to OneDrive. they started to internationally focus on Windows 10. This was a big thing because one of the things, if you've ever worked in an international environment, is trying to push updates, trying to push policy updates, and trying to do that from a central location is problematic when Windows updates are measured in the gigabytes sometimes, particularly with those bandwidth issues. Having people be able to pick up devices, local devices, and be able to authenticate via the internet, not having VPNs, not having to touch a domain controller beyond network was a big deal. They were able to remove all remote office IT. This is outside of Microsoft, but enabled the Microsoft success by adopting Meraki Cloud Solutions, which gave them visibility into what those offices were doing, understood their challenges with Wi-Fi, and they were able to gather a ton of telemetry that allowed them to renegotiate contracts with carriers in those areas to vastly lower their costs and improve their services. So the bottom line is, over about a 24-month period, they were able to save $1.9 million in annual IT costs, and that includes all the services that eGroup provided them, all of the new technologies that they purchased, just by adopting a services over servers model, and then sticking to their simplicity, security, and scalability approach to IT. They were able to reduce that downtime from 6 outages per month to 1 outage in 2019. Probably one of the most successful stories I've ever been a part of was just seeing the pain that they were in and how we were able to acknowledge a lot of it and solve it, and then quickly get them where they needed to be for the long run. They ended up with 4 SaaS solutions, 1 platform solution running on Azure Web Apps, and then 1 infrastructure solution that they delivered as a service in the end. I believe the last time I checked, they were down to 18 servers. So they were able to consolidate over 100 servers into 18 servers that they're running, take what was a $1 million plus Azure bill annually and reduce that to a fraction of what it was, while shifting some of the dollars to the services that are less touch, less management, a lot in the Microsoft portfolio. And then everything else is centrally managed. Everything's through the cloud. So they're able to access everything. Again, they have the visibility, they have the telemetry. When something goes wrong, they know it's wrong. And ultimately, we're able to eliminate all the pain points from their users so that IT became more of a, let's focus on the mission of our .org, as a nonprofit. Let's talk about how IT can do things like raise additional donor funds, or increase the client experience, or make our workforce more efficient so that they can reach more people, as opposed to working the weekends, fixing phone outages, and kind of doing infrastructure refreshes. The next one, again, much more simple and very similar to the other one. You'll see some of the same type of things in the solution. This organization was acquiring an equal size customer, actually a fraction of them. And right as COVID sent us all home, so they had a lot of logistics challenges with being able to onboard these people the way they would normally do it, with high touch, making sure that they were in front of them, shaking hands and really getting to know the organization. So one of the main challenges that they had was that the organization that was acquiring the other one was brand new to Teams, really hadn't even deployed it yet, but the acquired organization was moving pretty fast with it. So they didn't want to take that technology away from those users, and they were struggling with how do we get these people integrated into our culture, but also level up what we're doing so that everybody's doing the same thing. Simultaneously, while their service center was forced remote, they have a sizable call center where that's part of their main business, where it's business critical to them that those users be able to dial in and dial out from corporate phones, because what they saw was their success rate of people answering phones and not knowing those numbers. Everybody gets a lot of spam phone calls these days. So they were having those challenges. And they also had, the traditional sunk cost investments in on-prem resources that they didn't necessarily want to leave behind on day one. So to Jesus and Matt's point earlier, we were able to quickly get them up to speed on Teams, get everybody level set on that environment, consolidate the 2 environments, but leverage things like the Microsoft phone plan license so that all the users within the organization could have dial plans with Teams where you can actually dial numbers, receive numbers, have call queues, have all of those things from a service center standpoint. we were able to get the new acquired organization ported over into their own phone plans specific to the area that they were in, so that those were local phone numbers through third-party carrier services. We were also able to connect into their existing calling system so that everything, even coming from different sources, works, basically the same. And was able to do that with little to no infrastructure. Obviously, they had some existing infrastructure that we wanted to work with, but everything else was deployed from the cloud, which allowed us to do it remotely and quickly, allowed us to train this organization. And I can say it's one organization that I work with on, if not a daily, but a weekly basis, that I've never met in person. So, it's kind of three organizations working together. Looking forward to meeting them one day when all this is done. But we were able to successfully do this remotely and get their workforce working remotely through our ability to work remotely as well. Won't say remotely one more time, but coexistence with existing platforms, same phone numbers, anywhere access. They take their laptop on vacation, they need to make a call. It's coming from the phone number that you would expect it to come from, not where they are, different things like that. Really full mobility. And then a reduction in carrier fees. Is the team mentioned earlier, when making those internal calls, they're not treated as long distance, even if they are. And when making external calls, products like Scipio.io and even Microsoft Solutions can help reduce the carrier fees involved with long distance calling plans. And last but not least, this is the one that touches over quite a bit into Azure, but also works with Microsoft 365 Windows 10 entitlements. Similar story as the prior organization was really forced into remote work. One of the different things that they had was, or similar things, was the vendor access story. They needed remote vendors to be able to get into their systems. But one of the unique things that they had was legacy client server applications that were really designed to work in the office. So when you think of financial institutions, you've got a lot of legacy apps, you got things like that. The client can't be too far from the server. It needs to be on the network to operate efficiently. There's database calls coming from clients in the thousands and tens of thousands that are, obviously latency sensitive. So even being able to take the client and work across a VPN was not an effective solution, but also compliance and data governance and ensuring things didn't exfiltrate the system and still meeting all the compliance regulations was top of mind. So what we were able to do was in May, and it continues through this day in a different form, Microsoft launched a Windows Virtual Desktop offer in response to COVID that allowed organizations to do a 25-user desktop proof of concept. And when we talk of proof of concept, typically we found most of those are kind of pre-production environments where eGroup would come in and spend a couple weeks helping organizations launch virtual desktop, virtual application solutions within Azure, connect them into their data centers as necessary. If you already have Azure resources, great. Ensure that all the security is in place so that your end users, through the conditional access policies and all of the things that Jesus was talking about from a security standpoint, can authenticate from anywhere. You can validate that that resource is who they say they are, through multi-factor authentication and all of those conditional access rules. And they are able to, without VPNs, from any device that you allow, obviously there's policies around that too, be able to access those applications within that secure environment. And you're able to ensure things like the information stays within that environment. Just the visuals are streamed outside of it. And the only thing that, from a security standpoint, that you can't really protect is someone's ability to grab a phone and take a picture of a screen from stopping data exfiltration. So with Azure AD Premium, particularly the secure identity access management and the conditional access we're talking about, leveraging Microsoft Azure resources, leveraging Microsoft funding to get them started and build that scalable environment, getting them their first taste of Windows 10 with the Microsoft 365 licensing they already had from those entitlements, and using Windows Virtual Desktop, we were able to get those users up within really a week, harden it within 2 weeks, and have them a scalable environment that they could scale to all their organizational users with the click of a mouse to say, we have 25 users, let's go to 200. And keep all that information in the data center, make sure it's scalable, simplifies the end user device requirements, because generally, mostly any device can access a remote desktop. There are some caveats there. but the ability to simply add and remove users. And the remove users was critical as well, because when you're working with vendors and potentially vendor managed services, and even this is the way we would access their environment, if I'm no longer at that organization, the ability to disable my user in Azure Active Directory and be 100% sure that you've cut all access to the environment and that I haven't been able to exfiltrate data is very important to meeting compliance requirements. So, a couple quick success stories there. Thanks for listening. Again, if you have any how you did that, you want to know specific, a lot of those started off with workshops. I have 3 that are kind of up here that are directly dialed into that. But before I get into that, I really want to thank you for your time today. I know 3 hours is a long investment. Our ask is that contact us with more questions. You all asked a lot of great questions today. If there is an opportunity where you want to get help building a roadmap, or you want to look at a virtual desktop proof of concept, or calling plans, legacy calling systems, modernizing those to the cloud is of interest, we would love to talk to you about those. As I said at the beginning or end of Matt's presentation, one of the things we love about the workshop he described is we really need to learn more about your business to be able to help you. So those are some of the things we would want to do, and we can find the right workshop that fits for you. We'll be sharing this information out with you all at the end of the presentation. So we've created a handy request workshop form, a QR code. If you want to pull out your camera, just submit it, and we'll get in touch, or reach out to us. And then lastly, a couple things before I turn it over to Carly. I encourage everybody, if you go to our website and you go to the latest, there's a series of events, on-demand content. This event will be created as on-demand content. So if you need to catch up on parts of this, or you want to go through specific details of presentations, you have that to go back to. For example, I did one in July that's out there around Microsoft incentive programs and how they can fund some of these workshops, and how we get those happening so that it makes it easier on you to get started and get the advice you need. There's a lot of content out there, so go check that out. Number 2, there is a Teams Tuesdays. Every Tuesday, people like Jesus, Matt, and our extended team host at 11 a.m. Eastern Time a Teams Tuesday event. It's an Ask Me Anything series. Usually we have very light, kind of 10 to 15 minute presentation on new features, something that's of interest, topic of interest that we've seen. But the goal of that is to have people join and ask questions. So a lot of the questions you asked today, you can join and ask that. And then finally, if you're interested in Azure and you're really interested in how to start modernizing solutions, or maybe you're already using Azure and you're looking at what's next, we're going to be doing this again from 9 a.m. to noon tomorrow. And we're going to be talking in a similar talk track of starting with what's possible, going into some of the specific security initiatives that you could do in Azure. And then I will be talking a little bit more specifically than the success stories today that we saw just prior. We'll be talking about 4 to 5 solutions that we see over and over and over that are good starting points or good expansion points into the cloud to be able to address some of these and the funding programs around them. So with that, from Matt, Jesus, and I, really appreciate your time today. Carly, I'll let you jump on, kind of finish landing the plane, and wrap up with the winner.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, as an additional thank you today, we will be raffling off a Visa gift card, and we have thrown all of our participating attendees' names in a hat. So hang on one second while I do a quick virtual drum roll while I mix them up.
It was so much easier when these were actual business cards, right?
And our lucky winner is Juanita Lacefield. So congratulations, Juanita. Thank you for your participation today. And please keep a lookout for a follow-up message from me with details on how to claim your prize. Again, we greatly appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. We hope that everyone was able to take away some new knowledge on the features and solutions that M365 has to offer. And just to reiterate, if you haven't signed up for day 2 of our virtual roadshow tomorrow, please remember to do so, as we will be discussing how to confidently adopt Microsoft Azure solutions and ensure you're getting cloud right the first time. So thank you again, and we appreciate your time and especially your participation this morning, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.